My son sat on a wet park bench with 3 suitcases and my 5-year-old grandson shivering beside him. When I rolled down the window of my beat-up 1990 Ford truck, I asked him why he was not at the architecture firm. He looked at me with eyes red from crying and said, "Dad, I got fired." Richard said our bloodline was not worthy of his family name. He kicked us out. I did not scream. I did not yell. I just smiled a cold, hard smile and unlocked the passenger door. "Get in the car," I said. Richard Sterling thought he had just thrown out the trash, but he had no idea he had just declared war on the man who secretly owned the mortgage to his entire life. Before I tell you how I brought a billionaire to his knees, please like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you have ever been underestimated by arrogant people. My name is Caleb Bennett, and at 73 years old, I have learned that the most dangerous thing you can do is judge a book by its cover. To the people of Chicago, I am just an old black man driving a rusted truck wearing a flannel shirt that has seen better days. They see my calloused hands and assume I have nothing. They look at my gray hair and assume I am weak. They look at my old wooden house on the edge of town and assume I am poor. And I let them believe it. I have spent 40 years letting them believe it. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the sky over Chicago turned the color of a bruised plum. The rain had started as a drizzle but was quickly turning into a downpour. I was driving my old Ford pickup down near Lincoln Park, just taking the long way home after inspecting one of the warehouses I own. Nobody knows I own it. To the tenants, I am just the maintenance guy who comes to fix the leaky pipes. That is how I like it. Silence is profitable. Noise is expensive. I saw them before they saw me. It is a sight a father never wants to see. My son Damon was sitting on a park bench, completely exposed to the elements. Beside him was my grandson Leo, huddled under a thin jacket trying to stay dry. 3 large suitcases were stacked next to them, getting soaked by the rain. Damon is 32 years old. He is a brilliant architect. He is a good man. He has a gentle soul, too gentle perhaps for the sharks he married into. He married Sarah Sterling, the daughter of Richard Sterling, the biggest real estate tycoon in the state. I warned him. I told him that men like Richard Sterling do not see people like us as equals. They see us as labor. They see us as property. But Damon was in love, and love makes you deaf to the warning bells ringing in your ears. I pulled the truck up to the curb. The brakes squealed loudly, a sound that made people on the sidewalk turn and look with disdain. I did not care. I rolled down the passenger window. Damon looked up. His face was wet, but I could tell which drops were rain and which were tears. A man does not cry easily, not a man raised by Caleb Bennett, unless his world has completely collapsed. "Dad," Damon said, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here, son?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "It is 2 in the afternoon. You should be at the firm designing skyscrapers. Where is Sarah?" Damon looked down at his hands. They were shaking. "I got fired, Dad." "Fired," I repeated. The wipers on my truck slapped back and forth, creating a rhythm to the tension rising in my chest. "Why?" He looked at me, and the pain in his eyes hit me harder than a physical blow. "Richard called me into his office this morning. He told me that the family image was changing. He told me that he could no longer have someone like me attached to the Sterling brand. Someone like you, I asked, knowing exactly what the answer would be. He said my bloodline was not worthy," Damon whispered. "He said I was polluting the family tree. He said Leo was a mistake that needed to be corrected." I looked at my grandson. 5 years old, innocent, beautiful. A mix of my heritage and his mother's. And his grandfather had called him a mistake. The rage flared in my gut, hot and sharp, but I pushed it down. I buried it deep where I keep all my secrets. "And Sarah?" I asked. "She is locked in the estate," Damon said, a sob escaping his throat. He took her phone. He told her if she tried to leave with me, he would cut her off completely. He would make sure she never saw a dime of the family trust. He threw my clothes out on the lawn and told me if I was not off the property in 10 minutes, he would call the police and say I was trespassing. He froze our joint bank accounts, Dad. I tried to buy Leo a hot chocolate at the cafe across the street, and the card was declined. "I have nothing. I have nowhere to go." He buried his face in his hands. "I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. You were right. You were right about him. I should have listened. Now look at me. I am homeless, sitting on a bench with my son in the rain." I looked at the 3 suitcases. I looked at the boy shivering. I looked at the skyscrapers of Chicago rising in the distance, many of them built on land that I secretly owned, Richard Sterling. The name tasted like bile in my mouth. I knew Richard Sterling. Not as an equal, but from a lifetime ago. 40 years ago, I was the janitor in the first building Richard Sterling ever built. I mopped the floors while he walked past me in his Italian suits, kicking over my bucket without even looking down to apologize. I was invisible to him then. I am invisible to him now. He thinks he is a god in this city. He thinks he can discard people like used tissues. He thinks that because I drive a truck that sounds like a dying tractor and live in a small wooden house that I am powerless. He does not know that while he was inheriting his wealth, I was building mine. He does not know that while he was buying yachts, I was buying industrial zones. He does not know that the Phoenix Holdings Group, the mysterious investment firm that holds the debt on his precious new skyscraper project, is run by the old black man he probably does not even remember. Damon looked at me expecting anger. He expected me to lecture him. He expected me to say, "I told you so." He looked like a beaten dog waiting for one last kick. Instead, I leaned over and pushed the passenger door open. "Put the bags in the back," I said, my voice steady as a rock. "Get Leo in the truck. It is cold out there." "Dad, I can't go back to your place," Damon stammered. "I can't be a burden. I need to figure this out. I need to find a motel." "With what money?" I asked. He fell silent. "Get in the truck, Damon. You are coming home." He hesitated for a second longer, his pride warring with his desperation. Then he nodded. He picked up Leo, who immediately reached out for me. Grandpa Leo said, his teeth chattering, "I want to go home." "We are going home, little man," I said, softening my voice for the boy. "Grandpa has got you." Damon loaded the wet suitcases into the bed of the truck, covering them with an old tarp I kept back there. He climbed into the passenger seat, holding Leo on his lap. The truck cab smelled of old coffee and engine oil, a smell that Damon used to hate when he was a teenager, but now he inhaled it like it was oxygen. I put the truck in gear. The engine roared to life with a loud clanking sound. Damon looked at me. "Dad, what are we going to do?" "Richard said he is going to file for custody of Leo. He said he is going to prove I am unfit to be a father because I have no income and no home. He said he is going to erase me from Leo's life." I gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles were dark and scarred from years of manual labor. Richard Sterling wanted a war. He wanted to crush my son to feed his own ego. He wanted to wipe out my bloodline because he thought it was beneath him. He had made a fatal calculation. He judged a man by his shoes and not by his stride. I looked at Damon. "Let him try," I said. "But Dad, he is a billionaire," Damon said, despair in his voice. "He has lawyers, he has judges in his pocket, he has power. What do we have? We have this old truck and your pension. We cannot fight him." I merged into traffic, driving past the towering glass structure of the Sterling headquarters. I looked up at the penthouse office where Richard was probably sitting right now, sipping his scotch and congratulating himself on cleaning up his family tree. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who has just seen the prey step into the trap. "Damon," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "You think Richard Sterling is the only man in this city with secrets? You think he is the only one who knows how to play the game?" Damon looked at me confused. "What do you mean?" I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a dry towel for Leo. "I mean that Richard Sterling just made the biggest mistake of his life. He thinks he kicked a dog, but he just woke up a lion." I drove us away from the city center, heading toward the outskirts where my small, modest home stood. To the world, I was Caleb, the retired janitor. But inside my head, the gears were already turning. I was mentally reviewing my assets. I was calculating liquidity. I was drafting the text message I would send to my private attorney the moment we got inside. Damon leaned his head against the cool glass of the window. "I just want my wife back, Dad. I just want my dignity back." "You will get it all back, son," I promised him. "And you will get something else too." "What is that?" "You are going to get a front row seat to watch a giant fall." The rain beat harder against the windshield as we drove. It was the kind of storm that washed away the dirt and revealed what was underneath. Richard Sterling had started a storm, but he forgot that some people know how to build arcs and some people know how to command the lightning. As we turned onto the gravel road leading to my house, I saw the look of defeat on my son's face. He felt worthless. He felt small. He felt exactly how Richard wanted him to feel. It was time to change that. It was time to show him that the blood in his veins did not come from a line of servants. It came from a line of kings who had forgotten their crowns. I parked the truck. "Damon," I said, turning off the engine. "Dry your eyes. No more crying. Not for him. Not ever again. But Dad, listen to me. Today you lost a job and you lost a house, but tomorrow the education begins. Education? Damon asked. Yes. I am going to teach you the difference between being rich and being powerful. Richard is rich. But he is about to find out that money without character is just paper waiting to burn. We stepped out into the rain, but this time I did not feel the cold. I only felt the heat of the battle to come. I grabbed the suitcases. Let's go inside, I said. We have work to do. Damon followed me head down. He did not know it yet, but the old man walking in front of him with a limp and a faded shirt was about to buy the ground out from under his father-in-law's feet. The war for the Sterling Empire had just begun, and the first shot had been fired right there on that park bench in the rain. The gravel crunched loudly under the bald tires of my truck as we pulled up to the small wooden cabin that I have called home for the last 30 years. The rain was still hammering down, turning the dirt yard into a soup of brown mud. I killed the engine, and for a moment the only sound was the rhythmic tapping of raindrops on the rusted tin roof. I looked over at Damon. He was staring at the house with a look of pure devastation. To him, this cabin was not a home. It was a symbol of failure. It was a rotting structure with peeling white paint and a porch that sagged on the left side. It was the place where he grew up poor and the place he swore he would never return to once he got his degree. I saw the shame burning in his cheeks. He was thinking that he had dragged his son from a mansion with heated floors to a shack that smelled of damp wood and old memories. He did not know that the peeling paint was a choice. He did not know that the sagging porch was a camouflage. He did not know that underneath the floorboards of this humble cabin lay the deeds to half the industrial district of Chicago. We made a run for the porch, shielding Leo from the biting wind. I fumbled with the keys, my hands moving deliberately slow. I had to play the part. I had to be the old man whose joints were stiff from years of scrubbing floors. The door creaked open with a groan that sounded like a ghost welcoming us back. Inside, the air was stale and cold. I flipped the switch, and a single naked bulb flickered to life in the hallway, casting long shadows against the walls. The furniture was mismatched. A plaid sofa I bought at a thrift store in '95, a coffee table scarred by cigarette burns from my younger days, a small television that still had an antenna on top. Damon set the suitcases down on the linoleum floor. The sound echoed in the small space, emphasizing just how empty it was. "I am so sorry, Dad," Damon whispered, his voice trembling. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to bring Leo here. It is freezing. The roof probably leaks. God, what have I done?" I walked over to the thermostat and cranked up the heat. The old furnace in the basement clanked and groaned before roaring to life, pushing warm air through the vents. "It is a roof over your head, son," I said, walking to the kitchen to fill the kettle. "And it is paid for. Nobody can kick you out of here. Nobody can tell you that you are not worthy of this floor space." Damon sat down on the edge of the sofa, pulling Leo onto his lap. The boy looked around with wide eyes, taking in the poverty of his grandfather's life. "Is this where you live?" Grandpa Leo asked. "It is very small. It is cozy," I said, smiling at him. "And it is safe." Just then a sound sliced through the quiet air like a knife. It was a cell phone ringing. Not mine. Mine was an ancient flip phone that I kept turned off most of the time. It was Damon's phone lying on top of one of the wet suitcases. Damon froze. He stared at the screen as if it were a bomb about to detonate. The screen lit up the dark room. "It is him," Damon said. "It is Richard." "Answer it," I said. "Put it on speaker." Damon hesitated, his hand shaking as he reached for the device. He swiped the screen and tapped the speaker button. The voice that filled my small living room was smooth, arrogant, and dripping with the kind of entitlement that only comes from generations of unearned wealth. Damon Richards' voice boomed. "I assume you have found a gutter to crawl into by now." Damon swallowed hard. "I am at my father's house, Richard. Where is Sarah? Let me talk to her." A cruel laugh echoed from the phone. "Your father's house? Oh, you mean that termite-infested shack on the south side. I am surprised it is still standing. Listen to me closely, Damon, because I am only going to say this once. You have 24 hours. 24 hours for what Damon asked. To sign the divorce papers my lawyers are emailing you. If you sign them quietly and disappear, I will give you a small settlement. Enough to rent a studio apartment for a year. But if you fight me, If you try to claim any rights to my daughter or my money, I will bury you." I walked closer to the phone, my boots heavy on the floorboards, and Leo Damon asked, his voice breaking, "What about my son?" "Leo is a Sterling," Richard replied, his tone turning icy. "He has Sterling blood running through his veins, even if it has been tainted by yours. I will not have my grandson raised in squalor by a loser and a janitor. I am filing for emergency custody tomorrow morning. I have judges on speed dial. Damon, I will prove that you are homeless, unemployed, and unfit. I will scrub the influence of your low-class family out of him. By the time I am done with him, he won't even remember your name." I felt the rage rising in my chest. It was not a hot flash of anger. It was a cold, calculated fury. This man was not just attacking my son. He was attacking my legacy. He was threatening to steal my blood. I reached out and snatched the phone from Damon's hand. Damon tried to stop me, mouthing the word no, but I was already holding the device up to my mouth. "Listen to me carefully, Sterling," I said, my voice low and rough like gravel in a concrete mixer. There was a pause on the other end. "Who is this?" Richard asked, sounding disgusted. "This is Caleb Bennett," I said, "and you are making a mistake. You are holding my daughter-in-law against her will. That is kidnapping, and you are threatening to steal my grandson. That is an act of war." Richard laughed again, but this time it was louder, more derisive. "Oh, look at that." The janitor learned how to speak. "I remember you, Caleb. You used to empty the trash cans in my first building. You always smelled like bleach and desperation. Do not lecture me about war, old man. You are an ant. I am a boot. You do not fight the boot. You get crushed by it." I tightened my grip on the phone until the plastic creaked. "You think you know who I am," I said. "But you only saw the uniform. You never looked at the man. I do not look at trash." "I step over it," Richard spat. "Tell your son to sign the papers, and you stay out of my way, or I will have the city condemn that shack you live in and bulldoze it with you inside. Keep away from my daughter. Keep away from my family. You are not worthy of the air we breathe." The line went dead. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and suffocating. Damon had his face buried in his hands. He was sobbing quietly, his shoulders shaking. He was broken. He believed every word Richard had said. He believed we were ants. He believed we were powerless. I looked at the phone in my hand. I looked at the black screen. "Dad, I told you," Damon wept. "He is going to take Leo. He is going to take everything. We can't fight him. He is a billionaire." I placed the phone gently on the table. I walked over to my son and placed a hand on his shoulder. My grip was iron. "Stand up, Damon," I said. He looked up at me, confused by the steel in my voice. "Dad, just leave it." "Stand up," I commanded. He slowly rose to his feet, wiping his eyes. I looked him dead in the eye. "He called me a janitor," I said. And he was right. I was a janitor. I cleaned his toilets. I waxed his floors. I emptied his trash. But he forgot one thing. The janitor has the master keys. The janitor sees everything. The janitor knows where the bodies are buried because he is the one who has to clean up the mess. I turned away from him and walked down the narrow hallway toward my bedroom. "Where are you going?" Damon asked, his voice filled with panic. "Dad, do not do anything stupid. Do not call him back." I did not answer. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door behind me. The room was sparse. A single bed, a dresser, a crucifix on the wall. It was the room of a monk, the room of a man who needed nothing. I knelt down beside the bed. My knees cracked, but I did not feel the pain. I reached underneath the frame and pulled out an old, dusty shoebox. It was a cardboard box for a pair of work boots I bought 20 years ago. To anyone looking, it was just junk. I sat on the edge of the bed and lifted the lid. Inside, there were no shoes. Nestled in the custom-cut black foam was a device that Richard Sterling would not expect to find in a poor man's shack. It was a satellite phone. Heavy. Military grade. Encrypted. The kind of phone used by heads of state and black market warlords. Beside it lay a small black ledger bound in leather. I picked up the phone. It felt heavy in my hand. Heavy with potential. Heavy with consequences. Richard Sterling wanted to play a game of power. He wanted to use his money as a weapon. He thought I was bringing a knife to a gunfight. He had no idea that I was the one who manufactured the guns. I pressed the power button. The screen glowed a soft green, illuminating my face in the dark room. It searched for a signal connecting to a satellite orbiting somewhere miles above the Earth. Signal acquired. I dialed a number I had not called in 5 years. I waited. 1 ring, 2 rings. A voice answered on the other end, crisp, professional, alert. "Mr. Bennett," the voice said, "we did not expect to hear from you. Is everything all right?" I looked at the rain streaking against my bedroom window. I thought about my grandson shivering in the other room. I thought about the fear in my son's eyes. I thought about Richard Sterling laughing in his penthouse thinking he had won. "No, Jensen," I said, my voice calm and deadly. "Everything is not all right." "What do you need, sir?" the lawyer asked. "I want you to initiate Protocol Obsidian," I said. There was a pause on the line, a hesitation. Protocol Obsidian was the nuclear option. It was total war. "Sir, are you sure?" the lawyer asked. "That will authorize the liquidation of assets to purchase hostile debt. It will trigger a massive aggressive acquisition strategy. It will expose Phoenix Holdings." "I do not care," I said. "Target, sir. Richard Sterling," I said. "I want you to buy his debt. I want you to buy his loans. I want you to find every person he owes money to and buy the paper. I want to own the mortgage on his house. I want to own the lease on his car. I want to own the air he breathes." "Understood, sir. We will begin immediately." "And Jensen." "Yes, sir. I want a meeting with the head of the City Zoning Commission. Tonight. Consider it done." I hung up the phone. The screen went black. I sat there for a moment in the darkness listening to the wind howl outside. Richard gave me 24 hours to surrender. I only needed 1 hour to end him. I put the phone back in the box and closed the lid. I stood up and smoothed out my flannel shirt. I looked in the mirror. I saw the gray hair. I saw the wrinkles. But behind the eyes, I saw the young man who had scrubbed floors for $10 an hour, fueled by a hunger that never went away. I opened the bedroom door and walked back out into the living room. Damon was pacing back and forth, holding Leo. He looked at me expecting to see a defeated old man. "Dad, what are we going to do?" he asked again, desperate for an answer. I walked to the kitchen and opened the cupboard, taking out a can of soup. "First," I said, "we are going to feed Leo. Then you are going to get a good night's sleep." "But Richard," Damon stammered. "The 24 hours. I opened the can with a sharp snap. "Forget about the 24 hours, I said, dumping the soup into a pot. "Richard thinks he set a timer on us, but he just set a timer on himself." I turned on the stove and the blue flame flickered to life. "By this time tomorrow, son," I said, stirring the soup slowly, "Richard Sterling is going to wish he had never learned to dial a phone. Now set the table. We eat. Then we hunt." The next morning the sun did not shine. The sky was a sheet of gray steel that matched the feeling in my gut. I watched from the kitchen window as Damon walked out to my old truck wearing his best suit. It was an Italian suit worth $2,000, a remnant of his life as a Sterling. But against the backdrop of my peeling porch and the overgrown weeds in the yard, he just looked like a man wearing a costume to his own funeral. He was going to find work. He told me that with his portfolio and his experience designing the skyline of this city, he would have a job by lunch. He said he would rent a new apartment by dinner. He was trying to be brave. He was trying to prove that he did not need the Sterling name to survive. I poured my coffee and said nothing. I knew something he did not. I knew that Richard Sterling did not just fire people. He erased them. Damon returned 6 hours later. He did not look like the same man who had left. His shoulders were slumped. His tie was loose. He walked into the house and collapsed onto the sagging sofa, staring blankly at the wall. "They all said no, Dad," he whispered. "Every single firm." I sat down opposite him. "Even the ones who used to beg me to work for them," Damon continued, his voice hollow. "I went to Miller and Associates. I went to Blue Sky Design. I walked into the lobby and the receptionist looked at me like I was carrying a disease. The hiring manager at Miller actually came out and told me to leave. He said Richard Sterling called everyone in the city this morning. He told them that if anyone hired Damon Bennett Sterling Corp. would pull every contract and sue them into bankruptcy." I nodded slowly. The blacklist. It was a classic move for a bully with deep pockets. Starve the enemy. Cut off their supply lines. Make them beg. "I am toxic, Dad," Damon said, tears welling in his eyes. "I am a pariah. I have an Ivy League degree and 10 years of experience, and I cannot even get a job drafting blueprints for a parking lot." Just then a small cough came from the bedroom. It was a wet hacking sound that made every hair on my arms stand up. Damon jumped up and ran into the room. I followed him. Leo was lying on the bed wrapped in 3 blankets. His face was flushed red. His skin was burning hot. The rain from yesterday had done its work. "He is burning up," Damon said, panic rising in his voice. He touched Leo's forehead. "Dad, he is really hot. We need Tylenol. We need antibiotics. We need a doctor. Take him to the urgent care on 4th Street, I said. Damon pulled out his wallet. His hands were shaking so hard he dropped his credit card. He picked it up and stared at it. "I can't," he said. "The app." I checked the banking app on the way home. Richard froze the joint accounts. He claimed fraud. The bank locked everything pending an investigation. "I have $0, Dad. I have -$. He looked at his sick son, and then he looked at me. The shame on his face was absolute. A father who cannot buy medicine for his child feels like he has failed at the only job that matters. "I don't have any cash," Damon whispered. "I don't even have enough for a bottle of aspirin." I looked at my grandson. He whined softly, his eyes glassy with fever. Richard Sterling was not just attacking my son's career. He was attacking his survival. He was willing to let a 5-year-old boy suffer just to prove a point. I turned and walked out of the room. "Dad, where are you going?" Damon called out. I walked to the kitchen. I knelt down beside the refrigerator and pried loose a loose floorboard. It was a hiding spot I used to use back when I really was poor, back when I had to hide money from bill collectors. Now I used it for a prop. I pulled out a rusty coffee can. Inside was a roll of cash, 1s, 5s, a few 20s. The bills were wrinkled and smelled of old coffee grounds. It looked like the sad, desperate savings of an old man who didn't trust banks. I walked back into the bedroom and shoved the roll of bills into Damon's hand. "Take it," I said. Damon looked at the money. He saw the 1s and 5s. He thought this was everything I had. He thought this was my life savings, my funeral fund, my food money. "Dad, no," he said, trying to push it back. "I can't take this. This is all you have. Take the damn money, Damon." I snapped, my voice harsh to cover the emotion. "It is not for you, it is for the boy." He looked at Leo shivering on the bed. Then he looked at the crumpled bills in his hand. He swallowed his pride. He nodded. "I will pay you back, Dad," he choked out. "I swear to God I will pay you back every cent." "Go," I said. "Take the truck. Get the medicine. Get him some soup. Go." Damon scooped Leo up in his arms and ran out the door. I heard the truck engine cough and sputter before roaring to life. I watched through the window until the taillights disappeared around the bend. The silence returned to the cabin. But the air was different now. The air was charged with electricity. I waited 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then I stopped being the retired janitor. I walked into my bedroom and pulled the satellite phone from the shoebox again. I sat on the edge of the bed, my posture straightening. The fatigue vanished from my face. My eyes became sharp, cold, and predatory. I dialed the number. Jensen picked up on the first ring. "Go ahead, sir," Jensen said. I looked at the peeling wallpaper in my bedroom. I thought about Damon's face when he realized he couldn't feed his son. I thought about Richard Sterling sitting in his air-conditioned office thinking he had won the game because he cut off a credit card. "What is the status of the debt acquisition?" I asked. "We have secured 30% of the outstanding loans from the mid-level banks," Jensen reported. "We are moving on the major notes now. Sterling Corp is over-leveraged, sir. He borrowed heavily to build the Skyline Tower. If we buy the note from Liberty Bank, we will own the mortgage on his headquarters." "Buy it," I said. "Sir, Liberty Bank will want a premium. It will cost us $20 million above market value to get them to sell the note quietly without alerting Richard." "I don't care if it costs $50 million, I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I want that note, Jensen. I want to own the roof over his head. I want to own the chair he sits in. I want to own the ink in his pen." "Understood, sir. We will have the papers ready by tonight." "And Jensen," I added. "Yes, sir. I want you to find out who insures his construction sites. The safety liability insurance. That would be Apex Insurance, sir. Buy them too." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Buying an insurance company was a massive move. It was a Titan-level move. "Buy the insurance company, sir," Jensen asked, his voice trembling slightly. "You heard me. I want to be the one who decides if his construction sites are safe to operate. I want to be the one who can shut down his job sites with a single inspection. Buy Apex. Use the offshore account so he doesn't see it coming." "Yes, Mr. Bennett. Right away." I hung up the phone. I walked back to the kitchen and looked at the loose floorboard. The empty coffee can was still sitting on the table. Richard Sterling thought he had starved us out. He thought he had cut off our supply lines. He didn't know that while he was busy blocking my son from getting a job paying $60,000 a year, I was busy buying the bank that held his loans worth $60 million. I went to the sink and splashed cold water on my face. I needed to wash away the look of the predator before Damon came back. I needed to put the mask of the worried grandfather back on. But as I dried my face with a rough towel, I looked into the mirror and smiled. It was the smile of a man who knows that the trap has been set. The blockade was not trapping us in. It was trapping Richard Sterling out. He just didn't know it yet. He was fighting a war with bullets. I was fighting with gravity. And when I decided to let go, the whole world was going to crash down on top of him. We were sitting at the kitchen table, counting the crumpled bills I had pulled from the floorboard when the phone rang. It was not Damon's phone. It was the landline, a dusty old device hanging on the wall that only telemarketers called. Damon stared at it confused. Nobody had that number. "Answer it," I said, my instincts sharpening like a blade. Damon picked up the receiver. "Hello." There was a silence and then a sound that broke my heart. It was a whimper. A terrified, desperate whimper. "Damon, it's me. Sarah." Damon gripped the phone so tight his knuckles turned white. "Sarah, where are you? Are you okay?" "I am in the maid's quarters," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with hysteria. "I stole Maria's phone. Damon, you have to help me. He has me locked in. The windows have bars." "What do you mean locked in?" Damon shouted, standing up and knocking his chair over. "My father," Sarah sobbed. "He brought a doctor to the house. A private doctor." "Damon, I am pregnant." The room went deadly silent. I looked at my son. His eyes went wide. "Pregnant," he breathed. "I am 8 weeks along," Sarah cried. "But Richard found out. He saw the test in the trash. He says..." "Oh God. Damon, he says he won't let another mistake pollute his house. He says I have to choose. He scheduled a procedure for tomorrow morning here at the house. He said if I don't do it, he will declare me mentally incompetent and have me committed. He says I have to choose between the baby and my freedom." A roar ripped through Damon's throat. It was a primal sound, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. He slammed the phone down on the table but kept it on speaker. "I am coming for you," he screamed. "I am coming right now. I will kill him. I swear to God, I will kill him." Damon was already moving toward the door. His fists clenched, his eyes blind with bloodlust. He was going to drive to the Sterling estate and beat Richard Sterling to death with his bare hands, and he would end up in prison for life exactly where Richard wanted him. "Damon, stop," I barked. He didn't hear me. He was already reaching for the keys. I moved faster than a 73-year-old man should move. I grabbed his arm. My grip was like a steel vise honed by 40 years of turning wrenches. I spun him around and shoved him against the wall. "Let me go, Dad!" Damon screamed, struggling against me. "He is going to kill my child." "You walk out that door with your fist swinging and you lose everything," I yelled into his face. "You touch one hair on his head and he wins. He wants you to be the violent thug he tells everyone you are. Do not give him the satisfaction." Damon slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He buried his face in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "Then what do we do, Dad? We can't leave her there." "We are going to get her," I said, smoothing down my shirt. "But we are going to do it my way. We use the law. We use his own game against him." I grabbed the keys from the counter. "Get in the truck," I said. The drive to the Sterling estate was a journey between two worlds. We left the cracked pavement and chain-link fences of my neighborhood and entered the manicured, tree-lined streets of the wealthy. My old Ford truck rattled and coughed, struggling up the steep hills. People in luxury sedans stared at us with disgust as we passed. We were an oil stain on their perfect canvas. Damon sat in the passenger seat, bouncing his leg nervously. "What is the plan, Dad?" he asked. "We can't just knock on the door. He has armed security." I did not answer. I was checking my watch. I had made a call before we left the house. A call to the precinct captain of the North District, a man whose son's college tuition I had anonymously paid for 5 years ago. I didn't ask for a favor. I just reported a crime. We pulled up to the massive iron gates of the Sterling estate. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. A guard booth stood at the entrance. A man in a uniform stepped out, his hand resting on his holster. He looked at my truck with a sneer. "Lost, are we?" the guard asked, chewing gum. "Deliveries are in the back. Open the gate," I said, my voice low and steady. "We are here for Sarah Bennett." The guard laughed. "Oh, you must be the ex-husband. Mr. Sterling said you might show up. Turn around, pal. This is private property. If you are not gone in 10 seconds, I am authorized to use force." Damon leaned across me, shouting out the window. "My wife is in there! Let me in!" The guard unholstered his taser. "Last warning, turn around." Suddenly, the massive mahogany front doors of the mansion opened. Richard Sterling stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the driveway. He was wearing a white linen suit holding a glass of scotch. He looked down at us like we were insects crawling on his driveway. "I see the trash has arrived," Richard shouted, his voice echoing in the courtyard. "Let her go!" Richard, Damon yelled, climbing out of the truck. Richard took a sip of his drink. "She doesn't want to see you, Damon. She is resting. She has a big medical procedure tomorrow. We are cleaning up her life, getting rid of the parasites." "You are a monster," Damon screamed. "And you are trespassing," Richard replied calmly. "Guard, remove them." The guard stepped forward, raising the taser. I checked my watch again. 3, 2, 1. The sound of sirens cut through the air. Not one siren. 5. Blue and red lights flashed against the impeccably trimmed hedges. 3 police cruisers screeched to a halt behind my truck, blocking the driveway. Richard's face dropped. He gripped the balcony railing. "What is the meaning of this?" he shouted. An officer stepped out of the lead car. It was Sergeant Miller. He walked past my truck and looked up at the balcony. "Mr. Sterling, we received a credible report of a hostage situation at this address." "Hostage," Richard sputtered. "This is my home. That is my daughter." The report states that an adult female, Sarah Bennett, is being held against her will and threatened with forced medical procedures. Sergeant Miller set his hand on his weapon. "We need to do a welfare check immediately. Open the gate." Richard turned red. "This is ridiculous. I will have your badge for this. Do you know who I am? Open the gate, sir, or we will ram it." Sergeant Miller barked. Richard froze. He looked at the neighbors' houses. He saw curtains twitching. People were watching. The one thing Richard Sterling feared more than losing money was losing face. A police raid on his mansion would be on the front page of the news within the hour. "Open it," Richard hissed to the guard. The iron gate swung open with a groan. "Bring her out," Miller ordered. Richard disappeared into the house. A few minutes later, the front door opened again. Sarah stumbled out. She looked pale and terrified, clutching a small bag. When she saw Damon, she ran. She ran faster than I thought she could. Damon met her halfway down the driveway. They collided in a hug that nearly knocked them both over. They held each other, crying, shaking. Richard stood in the doorway, his face twisted in a mask of pure hatred. He pointed a finger at Sarah. "If you get in that truck, Sarah, you are dead to me," he screamed. Sarah turned to look at her father. She was trembling, but she stood tall. "I am leaving, Dad." "Fine," Richard yelled, throwing a suitcase down the stairs. It burst open, scattering her designer clothes across the pavement. "Go then. But know this, I am cutting you off. The trust fund is gone. The inheritance is gone. You will have nothing. You are going to go live in a shack with these animals. You will starve, Sarah. You will be scrubbing floors just like your father-in-law. Don't come crawling back when you are hungry." Sarah looked at the clothes scattered on the ground. Then she looked at the mansion. Then she looked at Damon and me. She walked over to my rusted truck. She climbed into the back seat next to the old tarp and the spare tire. "I would rather starve with them than eat at your table," she said. "Get in the car, Damon," I said, starting the engine. Richard watched us from the steps. He looked like a king whose castle had just been breached. "Enjoy the squalor," Richard screamed as we backed out. "I will see you in court. I will take the boy. I will take everything." I put the truck in drive. The exhaust pipe let out a cloud of black smoke that drifted right into Richard's face, making him cough and wave his hands. As we drove away, Sarah leaned her head on Damon's shoulder in the front seat. She reached back and squeezed my shoulder. "Thank you, Caleb," she whispered. I looked at her in the rearview mirror. She had just traded a $50 million inheritance for a seat in a 30-year-old Ford. She had just traded security for love. "You are welcome, daughter," I said. But as I drove back toward the dark reality of our situation, I knew the hardest part was just beginning. Richard had lost a skirmish, but the war was far from over. He would come for us with everything he had. I tapped the steering wheel with my thumb. Let him come, I thought, because while he was busy screaming at police officers, my lawyer Jensen had just closed the deal on the insurance company that covered every single one of his construction sites. Richard thought he had thrown his daughter into the mud. He didn't know that the mud was about to turn into quicksand and swallow his entire empire whole. We drove into the night, 3 refugees in a rusted ark heading toward a destiny that would change the skyline of this city forever. 7 days had passed since we escaped the Sterling estate. 7 days of sleeping on a lumpy mattress and eating canned soup. 7 days of watching my son stare at his phone waiting for job offers that never came. The blockade was working. Richard Sterling had successfully terrified every firm in the city into ghosting Damon. We were bleeding out slowly, just like Richard wanted. But he was impatient. He did not just want us to suffer in silence. He wanted to watch us squirm. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was delivered by a courier in a black sedan who looked at my peeling front porch with visible disgust. He handed the envelope to Sarah with 2 fingers as if he were afraid he might catch poverty from her touch. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with gold leaf lettering. The weight of it alone probably cost more than our grocery budget for the week. Sarah opened it, her hands trembling. "It is the annual charity gala," she whispered. "The biggest event of the year. My father is the keynote speaker." I looked at the card. It was an invitation for Mr. and Mrs. Damon Bennett. And at the bottom, in handwritten ink, was a note. "Let's put the past behind us, for the sake of the family." Sarah looked at Damon with a flicker of hope in her eyes. It was the hope of a child who wants to believe the monster under the bed has gone away. "Maybe he is sorry," Sarah said. "Maybe he realizes he went too far. Maybe this is his way of extending an olive branch." Damon scoffed. He was learning. The last week of rejection had hardened him. "He does not want peace, Sarah," he said. "He wants a show. He wants us to come crawling back so he can parade us around like conquered trophies." I sat in my armchair sharpening my pocket knife on a whetstone. The rhythmic scraping sound filled the silence of the room. "He is right, Sarah," I said. "Richard Sterling does not apologize. He negotiates. And right now he thinks he holds all the cards." "Then we shouldn't go," Sarah said, dropping the invitation on the table. "No," I said, stopping the knife. "We are going." They both looked at me surprised. "Why?" Damon asked. "Why would we give him the satisfaction?" "Because if we don't go, he tells the world we are cowards," I said, standing up. "If we don't go, he spins the narrative. He tells everyone he tried to reach out and we spat in his face. We go, we stand tall, and we let him make the mistake." "But we can't just walk in there," Damon said. "Look at us, Dad. I pawned my watch yesterday to buy groceries. We don't belong in that room anymore." "You belong wherever you stand," I said. "But you are not going alone. I am driving you." "You are driving us?" Damon asked, confused. "Yes. I will put on my old chauffeur uniform, the one I kept from 40 years ago. I will be your driver. I will be the help." "Dad, no," Damon protested. "I am not letting you bow down to him. I am not letting you play servant to that man. It is not bowing down, son," I said, my eyes cold and hard. "It is camouflage. The best place to hide a knife is in the hand of the man nobody notices." The night of the gala, the city was glowing with lights. We rented a modest sedan with the last of the cash from the coffee can. I sat in the driver's seat wearing a black suit that was tight around the shoulders and a chauffeur's cap that shadowed my eyes. In the back seat, Damon wore his only remaining suit, and Sarah wore a simple black dress she had managed to save from the purge. They looked like royalty who had lost their kingdom but kept their dignity. We pulled up to the grand entrance of the Millennium Hotel. Valets were parking Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. When I pulled our rental car up to the curb, the valet sneered. I got out and opened the rear door for Sarah. I bowed my head. "Ma'am," I said. "Thank you, Caleb," she whispered, squeezing my hand. We walked into the ballroom. It was a sea of diamonds and tuxedos. The air smelled of expensive perfume and hypocrisy. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a golden light over the city's elite. Richard Sterling was holding court in the center of the room. He was laughing, holding a glass of vintage wine surrounded by sycophants who laughed when he laughed. When he saw Damon and Sarah, the room went quiet. He had clearly prepared the audience. "Ah, the prodigal daughter returns," Richard announced, his voice booming, and she brought her baggage. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd. Damon stiffened, his jaw tight. "Hello, Richard," Damon said, keeping his voice even. "You invited us. We are here." Richard walked over, smiling that shark-like smile. "I did invite you. I wanted to see if you had learned your lesson, but I see you are still wearing that same suit from last season. Times must be tough." He turned to his friends, a group of wealthy investors. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet my son-in-law, or should I say my former architect. You see, Damon here has decided to explore new career opportunities. I hear he is looking for work. Perhaps you need someone to mow your lawns." The crowd laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. Sarah grabbed Damon's arm, holding him back. That is enough. Richard, Sarah said, her voice shaking. We are leaving. Oh, don't leave yet, Richard sneered. You haven't met the staff. He looked past them and his eyes landed on me. I was standing a few feet behind them, hands clasped behind my back, head bowed in my chauffeur's uniform. Well, 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 Richard said, his eyes lighting up with malicious delight. If it isn't Caleb, the janitor. I see you finally found a job you are qualified for, driving cars. Tell me, Caleb, does the uniform come with a muzzle, or are you allowed to speak to your betters tonight? I slowly lifted my head. I looked him in the eye. I did not blink. Good evening, Mr. Sterling, I said. Richard chuckled. He took a step closer to me, invading my personal space. He smelled of scotch and arrogance. You know I need a refill, he said, swirling his red wine. And since you are clearly the help, perhaps you can be useful for once. He raised his glass as if to hand it to me. But then he tipped his wrist. The dark red wine cascaded out of the glass, splashing all over the front of my black jacket. It soaked into the fabric running down my chest like a wound. It splattered onto my polished shoes. The room gasped. Oops, Richard said, his face a mask of mock surprise. My hand slipped. My apologies, old man. I guess coordination isn't your strong suit either. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $10 bill. He crumpled it up and threw it at my chest. It bounced off my wet lapel and fell to the floor. Here, that should cover the dry cleaning. Or a new shirt, since that one looks like it came from a dumpster. Clean yourself up, and then clean up this mess on the floor. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens before an explosion. Damon snapped. You son of a bitch, he roared. Damon lunged forward, his fist pulled back, ready to smash Richard's perfect teeth down his throat. The crowd screamed. Security guards stepped forward, reaching for their weapons. Stop. My voice was not loud, but it cracked through the air like a whip. I reached out and grabbed Damon's wrist, just inches from Richard's face. My grip was unbreakable. Damon froze. He looked at me, his eyes wild with rage. Dad, let me go, he hissed. Let me kill him. I looked at my son. I saw the fire in his eyes. It was the same fire I had when I was his age. But fire without control just burns the house down. I pulled his hand down slowly but firmly. I stepped between him and Richard. I did not look at the wine stain on my chest. I did not look at the $10 bill on the floor. I looked at Richard. He was smiling, waiting for the violence, waiting for the excuse to have us arrested and thrown in jail. He wanted the fight. He needed the fight to prove we were savages. Not here, Damon. I said, my voice low, almost a whisper. Not like this. But look at what he did, Damon cried, pointing at the stain. It is just wine, I said calmly. It washes out. But stains on a reputation do not. I turned to Richard. He looked disappointed that the punch hadn't landed. You are a generous man, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. But keep your money. You are going to need every penny of it very soon. Richard laughed. Is that a threat, janitor? It is a weather forecast, I replied. I put a hand on Damon's back and guided him away. Sarah was crying silently, her head down. Come on, I said. The air in here is stale. We walked out of the ballroom. We walked past the staring eyes. We walked past the whispers. We walked out with wine on my chest and shame on my son's face. But as we stepped into the cool night air, I leaned in close to Damon's ear. You did good, son, I whispered. Good, Damon choked out. Dad, he treated you like a dog. He threw money at you, and we did nothing. We just took it. I opened the car door for him. We didn't just take it, Damon, I said. We recorded it, corded. I tapped the small button on the lapel of my soaked jacket. A tiny hidden camera lens glinted in the streetlight. Every word I said, every drop of wine, every laugh from his rich friends, it is all on tape. And while he was busy performing for his audience, my lawyer just finalized the purchase of the bank that holds the loan on this very hotel. Damon looked at me stunned. You bought the hotel, he asked. Not yet, I said, climbing into the driver's seat. Just the debt. But by tomorrow morning, Richard Sterling won't be able to book a room here, let alone host a party. I started the engine. He wanted a show. I said, staring at the hotel entrance where Richard was probably toasting his victory. Well, the curtain is just going up. And he has no idea that he is not the director. He is the clown. The wine stain on my chauffeur uniform did not wash out. I scrubbed it with bleach. I scrubbed it with soap. I scrubbed it until my knuckles were raw. But the purple mark remained on the cheap fabric, a permanent reminder of the night Richard Sterling tried to buy my dignity for $10. I hung the jacket on the back of the kitchen chair. I did not throw it away. I wanted to see it every morning. I wanted to look at that stain while I drank my coffee. It was not a stain anymore. It was a target. While Richard was likely sleeping off a hangover in his penthouse believing he was the king of the city, I was sitting at my small, wobbly kitchen table with a stack of documents that would make his blood run cold. My lawyer Jensen had done his digging. He found the crack in the foundation of the Sterling Empire. It was a project called the Skyline. It was Richard's vanity project, a 70-story glass monstrosity that he claimed would redefine the city. But the only thing it was redefining was his debt-to-income ratio. The construction was 6 months behind schedule. The unions were threatening to strike. And most importantly, Richard owed $50 million to a consortium of banks that were losing patience. He was drowning. He was moving money from one account to another, robbing Peter to pay Paul, trying to keep the illusion of solvency alive. He needed a miracle. So I decided to give him one. I instructed Jensen to register a new company. We called it Phoenix Holdings. It sounded impressive. It sounded powerful. It sounded like the kind of firm that saved billionaires from their own stupidity. But Phoenix Holdings had no employees. It had no office. It had no board of directors. It was just a shell, a ghost. And the only person pulling the strings was an old black man sitting in a wooden shack with a satellite phone. I sent Jensen into the lion's den on a Wednesday morning. I was not there, but I could see it in my mind. I knew exactly how it played out. Jensen walked into the Sterling headquarters wearing a $3,000 suit carrying a briefcase made of Italian leather. He breezed past the frantic secretaries and the worried accountants. He walked into Richard's office with the confidence of a man who owned the room. Richard was desperate. I knew he was desperate because he took the meeting. Men like Richard Sterling do not take unsolicited meetings with unknown investment firms unless they are staring into the abyss. Jensen sat down and laid the offer on the table. A $50 million capital injection. Immediate liquidity. No questions asked about the delays. No questions about the cost overruns. Just pure cold cash to save the Skyline project. Richard must have thought he was dreaming. He must have thought God himself had sent an angel in a pinstripe suit. He didn't ask where the money came from. He didn't ask who was behind Phoenix Holdings. Greed has a way of blinding a man to the obvious. He just saw the zeros on the check. He signed the preliminary agreement right there on the spot. He invited the Trojan horse into his city, and he even held the gate open for it. Later that afternoon, I was working on the engine of my truck, trying to coax a few more miles out of the alternator. Damon had gone out to a local building supply store. He was trying to pick up some freelance drafting work, doing small renovations for homeowners who didn't care about his last name. It was humbling work for an architect who used to design museums, but Damon was learning that honest work has no shame. I was wiping grease from my hands when I saw Damon's car pull into the driveway. He didn't park. He slammed the brakes and jumped out. He looked pale. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "Dad," he said, his voice shaking. I saw him. Saw who I asked, though I already knew. Richard. I was at the lumber yard on 5th Avenue. I was buying plywood for that garage renovation job. He was there inspecting materials for the Skyline. I stopped wiping my hands. The universe has a funny way of arranging these meetings. "What happened, son?" Damon leaned against the hood of the truck, breathing hard. He came up to me, Dad. He looked happy. He looked manic. I have not seen him this happy in years. He laughed at me. He saw me loading plywood into the back of my car, and he laughed. What did he say? He told me that I should get used to the heavy lifting. He said that my days of working in air conditioning were over, and then he told me the news. Damon looked at me with fear in his eyes. He said he found a partner, Dad. He said a massive international investment firm just backed him. He said they are called Phoenix Holdings. He said they are putting $50 million into the Skyline project tomorrow. I kept my face completely still. I did not smile. I did not blink. "Is that so?" I said calmly. "Yes," Damon cried. "Dad, do you understand what this means? He is saved. He has fresh capital. He told me that with this new partner, he is going to buy up every small architecture firm in the city just to make sure I never work again. He said he is going to use the profits from the skyline to hire the best lawyers in the country and take Leo away from me. He said he is going to crush my career into dust just for sport. Damon kicked the tire of the truck in frustration. We lost Dad. We waited for him to fail. We waited for the banks to squeeze him. But he wriggled out of it. He always wriggles out of it. The rich always help the rich. Some billionaire buddy of his probably bailed him out just to keep the club exclusive. I looked at my son. I saw the terror that Richard Sterling had planted in his heart. Richard was using my money to threaten my son. The irony was so thick I could taste it. He stood there in the lumberyard gloating about his new partner. He bragged about the power of Phoenix Holdings. He bragged about the intelligence of the investors who saw his vision. He was bragging about me. He was bragging about the janitor he had humiliated. He was bragging about the man whose bloodline he called unworthy. He did not know that the hand reaching out to save him was actually the hand that was positioning itself to strangle him. Damon sat down on the muddy grass, defeat radiating from him. I should just give up, he whispered. I should just sign the papers. Maybe if I surrender, he will let me see Leo on weekends. I can't fight a $50 million war, Dad. I just can't. I walked over to him. I wiped the grease from my hands onto a rag. Stand up, Damon. He looked up at me. Stand up, I repeated. He stood up slowly. Listen to me, I said, my voice low and fierce. Richard Sterling is a fool. He is a fool with $50 million, Damon argued. No, I said. He is a fool who just sold the keys to his castle to a stranger because he was too arrogant to check the ID. Damon looked confused. What do you mean? I mean that money is not always a lifeline, son. Sometimes it is a leash, and sometimes it is an anchor. Richard thinks he just got a partner, but what he really got was a boss. But he said he is going to crush me, Damon said. Let him talk, I said. Let him brag. Let him feel invincible. A man who thinks he cannot be touched is a man who stops looking over his shoulder. And that is exactly where we want him. I walked back to the truck and slammed the hood shut. You go inside and wash up. You help Sarah with dinner. You hug your son. And you let Richard Sterling enjoy his victory lap. But Dad, Damon asked, why aren't you worried? He has $50 million. I turned to look at him. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. Because, son, I know exactly where that money came from. And I know exactly what it is going to do to him. I walked into the house, leaving Damon standing in the driveway. He didn't understand. He couldn't understand. Not yet. I went into my bedroom and opened the shoebox. I took out the satellite phone. There was a text message from Jensen. Contract signed. Funds transferred. We own 51% of the project upon default. I smiled. Richard Sterling thought he had found a savior. He thought he had found a peer. He had walked right up to my son and threatened to destroy him using the very weapon I had forged. He told Damon he was going to crush his career. I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at the crucifix on the wall. Richard Sterling was about to learn a biblical lesson. He was about to learn that the higher you build your Tower of Babel, the harder the bricks fall when the language changes. And the language had just changed. He was no longer speaking money. He was speaking debt. And the debt collector was sitting in a flannel shirt in a wooden cabin holding the deed to his soul. I texted Jensen back 3 words. Tighten the noose. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. Richard would spend the money. He would restart the construction. He would feel safe. And that is when I would pull the rug out from under him, not by violence, not by shouting, but by simply reading the fine print of the contract he was too arrogant to read. Damon thought the war was over. He was right. It was over. Richard just didn't know he was already dead. The morning of the signing, I did not wear a suit. I wore a gray uniform that I bought at a second-hand store for $5. It was a size too big and smelled faintly of mothballs. I wanted to look small. I wanted to look like part of the furniture. I wanted to look like exactly what Richard Sterling expected me to be. A nobody. A servant. A ghost in the machine of his success. I drove my truck to the service entrance of the Sterling Tower. I did not park in the garage. I parked by the dumpsters. It was fitting. That was where Richard thought I belonged. Jensen was waiting for me in the lobby. He looked nervous. He was a high-powered attorney used to swimming with sharks, but he knew that today he was walking into a tank with a piranha. He was holding a heavy box of files. "Mr. Bennett, Are you sure about this? Jensen asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. If he recognizes you, if he throws you out. He won't throw me out, I said, taking the heavy box from him. He needs the money too much. Greed makes a man blind, Jensen. Just stick to the script. I am the runner. I am the mute old man who carries the paper. Nothing more. We took the elevator to the penthouse. The doors opened onto a world of marble and glass. The reception area alone cost more than my entire neighborhood. We walked into the boardroom. It was empty except for Richard. He was standing by the window looking out at the city he thought he owned. He turned when we entered. He looked tired. There were bags under his eyes and a tremor in his hand that he tried to hide by gripping the back of a leather chair. But when he saw Jensen, he put on the mask. The smile appeared. The chest puffed out. Jensen Richard boomed, walking over to shake his hand. The man of the hour, the savior of the skyline. Good morning, Mr. Sterling. Jensen said, his voice steady. We have the papers. Phoenix Holdings is ready to execute the transfer immediately upon signature. Excellent, Richard said, rubbing his hands together. Let's get this over with. My contractors are waiting for their checks. Then Richard looked past Jensen. He saw me standing by the door holding the box of files. My head bowed. My shoulders slumped. His smile vanished. His face twisted into a look of pure revulsion. What the hell is he doing here? Richard spat, pointing a finger at me. Jensen didn't flinch. He is my assistant, Mr. Sterling. He carries the documents. The files are heavy. Richard laughed, a cold, cruel sound. Your assistant? You mean the janitor? The guy who ruined my carpet last week with his cheap wine. This man is a curse, Jensen. He is a walking black cat. Every time he shows up, something smells like garbage. Why on earth would a firm like Phoenix hire a loser like this? I stood perfectly still. I stared at the carpet. I let his words wash over me like dirty water. He is reliable, Jensen said. And he is discreet. He does what he is told. Richard walked up to me. He circled me like a vulture inspecting a carcass. Discreet, huh? Reliable. He stopped in front of me. He was close enough that I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath, masked by expensive mints. You know, Caleb, Richard said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I almost feel sorry for you. You cling to these powerful men hoping some of their magic will rub off on you. But you are just a stain. You will always be a stain. I said nothing. I just tightened my grip on the box. Let's sign the papers, Jensen said, trying to divert him. Richard turned back to the table. He sat down at the head of the long mahogany table. Jensen began laying out the contracts. This is the standard loan agreement, Jensen explained. $50 million. Immediate release. But as we discussed, Mr. Sterling, given the risky nature of the project and the current delays, the board of Phoenix Holdings requires additional collateral. Collateral. Richard waved his hand. You have the building. You have the land. It is not enough, Jensen said, pushing a specific document forward. The building is already leveraged. The land is mortgaged. To approve this hot loan today, the board requires a personal guarantee. Richard stopped. He picked up the document. A personal guarantee, he read. You want me to pledge my private assets, my homes, my portfolio, my art collection, even my cars. Everything, Jensen said. It is a formality, really. Just to show the investors you are fully committed. Richard hesitated. I could see the fear in his eyes. This was everything he had. If he signed this and the project failed, he would be destitute. He would be on the street. I don't know, Richard muttered. This is highly irregular. Jensen started to pack up the papers. I understand, Jensen said coolly. It is a lot to ask. I will tell the board you declined. We can try again next month, perhaps, when your other loans come due. Next month meant bankruptcy. Richard knew it. I knew it. Wait, Richard snapped. He looked at the papers. He looked at the $50 million figure. It was his lifeline. It was the only thing that could keep the lie of his success alive for a few more months. I will sign it, Richard said, picking up the gold pen. But before the pen touched the paper, he stopped. He looked at me again. I was standing in the corner watching. Something about my presence bothered him. He felt small. He felt desperate. And men like Richard Sterling cannot handle feeling small. They need to crush someone else to feel big again. Wait, he said, putting the pen down. What is it? Mr. Sterling, Jensen asked. My shoe, Richard said. Excuse me. My shoe, Richard repeated, pointing under the table. It is scuffed. I must have hit it on the chair leg. I can't sign a $50 million deal with scuffed shoes. It is bad luck. He looked at me. A wicked smile curled his lips. Boy, he called out. I did not move. I am talking to you, Caleb. Richard barked. Come here. I walked slowly to the table. Yes, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice raspy. My shoe is dirty, Richard said, leaning back in his chair, crossing his legs to present his Italian leather loafer. Fix it. I looked at the shoe. It was perfectly polished. There was not a speck of dust on it. I don't have a cloth, sir, I said. Use your sleeve, Richard said. Use your shirt. I don't care. Just get down on your knees and buff it. Show me that you know your place. The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed. Jensen looked at me, his eyes wide with panic. He was about to intervene. He was about to tell Richard that he was talking to the owner of the company. I caught Jensen's eye and gave a barely perceptible shake of my head. No, not yet. Richard laughed. Look at him, Jensen. He is hesitating. He has pride. Can you believe it? The janitor has pride. If you want the money, Richard hissed, you will get a shine. If this man doesn't kneel, I don't sign. And Phoenix Holdings loses the deal. It was a power play. A sick, twisted test of dominance. He wanted to humiliate me to prove that even as he signed away his life, he was still the master. I thought about Damon. I knew he was watching. I had a button camera on my shirt. He was sitting in the truck outside, staring at a screen, watching his father be treated like a dog. I knew he was crying. I knew he wanted to storm the building. But I also knew that pride is expensive, and revenge is an investment. I slowly lowered my body. My knees cracked as they hit the plush carpet. I bowed my head. I reached out with the sleeve of my gray uniform. I touched the leather of his shoe. That is it, Richard purred, looking down at me like a king looking at a peasant. Rub it. Make it shine. That is what you are good at, isn't it, Caleb? Cleaning up the dirt of better men. I moved my arm back and forth. I buffed the leather. Inside my head, I was not kneeling. Inside my head, I was standing 10 feet tall. Inside my head, I was doing the math. $10 million, I thought as I rubbed the toe. That is the price for this insult. $20 million, I thought as I rubbed the heel. That is the price for making my son watch this. $30 million. That is the price for Sarah. $40 million. That is the price for Leo. $50 million. That is the price for the bloodline you called unworthy. I buffed until the friction warmed the leather. I buffed until I felt Richard relax. He felt powerful now. He felt like he had won. Good, Richard said, kicking my hand away. That is enough. Now get out of my sight before you make me sick. I stood up. My knees ached. My sleeve was ruined, but my spirit was untouched. I walked back to the corner and stood in the shadows. Richard picked up the pen. He signed his name with a flourish. Richard Sterling. He signed the personal guarantee. He signed the asset pledge. He signed the confession of judgment. He handed the papers to Jensen. Done, Richard said, standing up. When do the funds hit? Within the hour, Jensen said, putting the papers into his briefcase. It was a pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Sterling. Richard didn't answer. He just looked at me one last time. You see, Caleb, he said, pointing at the signed contract. That is the difference between us. I sign checks. You shine shoes. Remember that. I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw a man standing on a trapdoor holding the rope that would snap his own neck. I will remember it, Mr. Sterling, I said. I will remember it every single day. Jensen and I walked out of the office. We walked to the elevator. The doors closed, blocking out Richard's smug face. As the elevator descended, Jensen looked at me. He looked like he was about to be sick. Mr. Bennett, I am so sorry, he whispered. That was inhumane. I should have stopped it. I looked at the stain on my sleeve. I brushed it off. Do not be sorry, Jensen, I said, but he made you kneel. I smiled. It was a cold, dark smile. He thinks I knelt to serve him, Jensen, but he is wrong. A sniper kneels before he takes the shot. A runner kneels before the race begins. I was not serving him. I was taking aim. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. File the papers, I said, walking out into the sunlight. Every single one of them, Jensen asked. Every single one. Register the lien on his house today. Register the lien on his cars. lock it all down, and the funds for the project. Release them, I said. Let him spend it. Let him feel rich for a few weeks. Let him build his tower. I climbed into my truck. Damon was sitting in the passenger seat. His face was wet with tears. He looked at me with a mixture of horror and love. Dad. Damon choked out. Why did you do that? Why did you let him do that to you? I started the engine. I looked at the Sterling Tower rising above us. Because, son, I said, putting the truck in gear. I just bought his dignity for the price of a shoe shine. And believe me, it was a bargain. Richard Sterling had his money. But I had his life. And as I drove away, I realized that the dirt on my sleeve was the cleanest thing in that entire building. The cabin was quiet, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the silence of a house holding its breath after a funeral. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the loose window pane. I could not sleep. I could still feel the phantom sensation of Richard Sterling's leather shoe under my hand. I could still hear the laughter of the wealthy elite echoing in my ears. But that was not what kept me awake. What kept me awake was the look on my son's face when I stood up from that carpet. It was a look of total devastation. He had watched his hero fall. He had watched the man who taught him to walk bow down to a tyrant. He didn't know it was a tactical maneuver. He only saw the surrender. At 3 a.m, I heard the front door creak open. I sat up. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and grabbed my robe. I walked out into the living room. It was empty. The sofa where Damon and Sarah slept was neatly made. Sarah and Leo were asleep in the back room, but Damon was gone. I looked out the window. The interior light of my old Ford truck was on. I put on my boots and walked out into the cool night air. The gravel bit into the soles of my feet. I pulled the truck door open. Damon was sitting in the driver's seat. His suitcase was on the seat next to him. He was holding a bottle of cheap whiskey, the kind I kept under the sink for toothaches. He was staring at the steering wheel, tears streaming down his face silently. Going somewhere, I asked, my voice cutting through the night. Damon jumped. He tried to hide the bottle but gave up. He wiped his face with his sleeve. I can't do this, Dad, he whispered, his voice thick with alcohol and grief. I can't stay here. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. And where exactly are you going, Damon? You have no money. You have no car. You have no job. I don't know, he cried, slamming his hand against the wheel. Anywhere. Anywhere but here. I am leaving Sarah a note. I am telling her to go back to him. Go back to Richard, I asked. Yes. He will take her back if I am out of the picture. He will take care of Leo. They will have money. They will have a future. And what about you? Me. Damon laughed, a bitter, broken sound. I am nothing, Dad. Look at me. I am a 32-year-old man living in his father's shack, drinking rot-gut whiskey while his father shines shoes for a living. I am poison. Richard was right. Everything I touch turns to ash. I watched you kneel today, Dad. I watched you humiliate yourself for me. I can't live with that. I can't look at you without seeing you on that carpet. I have to go. It is the only way to save them. He reached for the key in the ignition. I reached in and snatched the keys out before he could turn them. I tossed them into the darkness of the yard. You are not going anywhere, I said. Let me go, Damon shouted, lunging for the door. Let me go before I ruin your life too. I grabbed him by the collar of his shirt. I hauled him out of the truck. He stumbled, his legs weak from the drink. I shoved him against the side of the truck bed. The metal groaned. You think you are saving us? I yelled into his face. You think running away is noble? That is cowardice, Damon. That is exactly what Richard wants. He wants you to break. He wants you to fold. He wants you to hand over your wife and son because you think you are not good enough. I am not good enough. Damon sobbed, sliding down to the ground. I let him treat you like a dog. I knelt down in front of him. I grabbed his shoulders and shook him hard. Listen to me, I said, my voice dropping to a low, intense growl. You think I knelt because I am weak. You think I shined his shoe because I am afraid of him. Yes, Damon wept. He has the power, Dad. He has the $50 million. He won. I slapped him. Not hard, but enough to snap his head up. Enough to make him focus. Look at me. He looked at me, his eyes wide and shocked. I did not kneel to serve him, I said. I knelt to inspect the foundation. Damon blinked, confused. You think I am just a mechanic, Damon? You think I am just a janitor who got lucky with a few savings bonds? You have never asked me how I bought this land. You never asked me where I go during the day. I stood up and pulled him to his feet. I dragged him to the edge of the porch and pointed out at the city lights flickering in the distance. You see that city, son? I helped build it. Not just with a mop, with my mind. For 40 years I watched men like Richard Sterling. I watched how they move. I watched how they lie. I watched how they steal. And I learned. I turned him to face me. I am not a victim, Damon. I am a hunter. And when you hunt a predator like Richard Sterling, you do not shoot him when he is looking at you. You wait. You bait the trap. You make yourself look small. You make yourself look weak. You let him think he is the king of the jungle. But the shoe, Damon stammered. The $50 million. The $50 million was the bait, I whispered. Damon froze. The wind rustled the leaves in the oak tree above us. What? I leaned in close. Who do you think gave him that money, Damon? Who do you think owns Phoenix Holdings? Damon's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at me as if he was seeing a stranger. You, I asked, breathless. Me, I said. I gave him the rope. I gave him the money because I knew his greed would make him sign the contract without reading the fine print. I knew he would mortgage his entire life just to keep his vanity project alive. But why, Damon asked, his mind reeling. Why give him money? Because a man with no hope fights cautiously, I said. But a man with $50 million gets reckless. He gets arrogant. And Richard Sterling is the most arrogant man alive. He thinks he bought his freedom today, but he actually just sold his soul to the janitor. I picked up the bottle of whiskey from the truck seat and poured it out onto the ground. The smell of alcohol mixed with the smell of wet earth. So you are not going anywhere, I said. You are going to stay right here. You are going to dry your tears, and you are going to watch what happens when a wolf realizes he is trapped in a cage with a lion. Damon looked at the puddle of whiskey. He looked at me. The despair in his eyes was slowly being replaced by something else. Awe and fear. Just then my pocket buzzed. It was not my old flip phone. It was the satellite phone I had slipped into my robe pocket. I pulled it out. The screen lit up my face in the darkness. It was a news alert. I smiled. The timing was perfect. I handed the phone to Damon. Read it, I said. Damon took the phone. His hands were shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear. He read the headline out loud. Breaking news. Construction on the Skyline Tower halted indefinitely. He looked up at me. Keep reading, I said. City Zoning Commission issues immediate stop work order following anonymous tip regarding structural safety violations and illegal land use permits. The entire site has been condemned pending a full federal investigation. All funding accounts associated with the project have been frozen. Damon scrolled down. Sources say the safety violations are severe. The insurance carrier Apex Insurance has voided the liability policy effective immediately, leaving Sterling Corp exposed to millions in potential lawsuits. Damon looked up. His jaw was slack. Apex Insurance, he whispered. The company that just canceled his policy. I bought them yesterday, I said casually, taking the phone back. And the zoning commission, he asked. The anonymous tip. I know the commissioner, I said. We play chess on Sundays. I told him he might want to take a closer look at the concrete mixture Richard was using to cut corners. Damon leaned against the truck. He looked like he had been hit by lightning. You stopped the project, he said. You froze the money. You canceled the insurance. I nodded. Richard Sterling woke up this morning thinking he was a god, I said. By lunchtime, he will realize he is just a man standing in a hole that he dug himself. Damon looked at the phone, then back at the city lights. He is going to lose his mind, Damon whispered. He just signed a personal guarantee. If the project stops, he defaults. Exactly, I said. And when he defaults, Phoenix Holdings calls the loan. And since he cannot pay, we take the collateral. Damon's eyes went wide. We take everything he said. We take everything I confirmed. The house, the cars, the art, the company. Damon looked at me, and for the first time in weeks I saw a smile. It was a small, terrified smile, but it was there. You are dangerous, Dad, he said. I am a father, I replied. And nobody touches my family. I put my arm around his shoulders. Now come inside. Sarah will be waking up soon, and we need to be ready. Because when Richard sees the news, he is not going to call his lawyer. He is going to call us. Why would he call us? Damon asked. Because I said leading him back to the porch he is going to think it is a mistake, he is going to think he can fix it, and he is going to want to scream at someone. Let him scream, let him expend his energy. We walked back into the small wooden cabin. It didn't look like a shack anymore, it looked like a command center. Damon went to the sink and washed his face. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. He looked different. He stood taller. "Dad," he said, drying his face. "Yeah. Does he know? Does he know it is you?" "Not yet," I said, sitting down at the kitchen table to wait for the sunrise. And that is the best part. He is going to spend the next 24 hours chasing ghosts. He is going to be fighting the zoning board, the insurance company, and the bank. He won't even look in our direction. I poured myself a cup of yesterday's coffee. "Go to sleep, son. The hunt has just begun. And tomorrow, the beast starts to bleed." Damon walked into the back room. He didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked like a student. I sat there in the darkness, listening to the wind. I thought about the stain on my uniform. Richard had called it a mark of shame. He was wrong. It was a mark of ownership, and I was coming to collect. The morning the money ran out started like any other Tuesday in the Sterling Empire. Richard was sitting in his leather chair high above the city, watching the rain streak against the glass. He was waiting for the coffee to kick in. He was waiting for the construction crews to get back to work. He was waiting for the world to bow down to him again now that he had signed the deal with Phoenix Holdings. But the world had other plans. At 9 in the morning, the phone on his desk rang. It was the red line, the line reserved for emergencies and major investors. Richard picked it up expecting good news. He expected to hear that the $50 million had cleared. "Sterling speaking," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "Mr. Sterling, this is Marcus Thorne from Liberty Bank." Richard smiled. Marcus was an old golf buddy. They had spent weekends in the Hamptons together. "Marcus," Richard said, leaning back. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Are you calling to apologize for the interest rates?" "I am calling to inform you of a change in status," Marcus said. His voice was not friendly. It was the voice of an executioner reading a warrant. "Change in status?" Richard asked, sitting up straighter. "Yes. We have received notice of the stop work order on the Skyline Tower. We have also been informed that your liability insurance has been canceled by Apex. Under the terms of your loan agreement, specifically Clause 14, Section B, this constitutes a material breach of contract." Richard laughed nervously. "Marcus, come on. It is a paperwork mix-up, a zoning glitch. I have Phoenix Holdings backing me now. The money is there." "The money is not there," Richard Marcus cut in. "And because you are in breach, Liberty Bank is exercising its right to accelerate the debt. We are calling the loan." "Calling the loan?" Richard stammered. "The whole thing." "The entire principal balance plus interest and penalties," Marcus said. $75 million, payable immediately. "Immediately," Richard shouted, standing up. "You can't be serious. I have 30 years with your bank." "You have until close of business today," Marcus said. "If the funds are not wired, we will begin asset seizure proceedings tomorrow morning. Good luck, Richard." The line went dead. Richard stood there holding the receiver. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. $75 million. Today. He didn't have $75 million. He didn't have $5 million. He was cash poor and asset heavy, and now the assets were worthless. He dropped the phone. It hit the desk with a crack. Panic is a funny thing. It starts slow like a leak in a dam, and then all at once the wall breaks. Richard didn't think. He didn't plan. He reacted. He grabbed his cell phone. His fingers fumbled over the screen. He called his CFO. Voicemail. He called his lawyer. Voicemail. He called his friends, the ones who drank his wine and ate his food. Voicemail. 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 The rats could smell the water rising. The ship was sinking, and Richard Sterling was standing alone on the bridge. "Phoenix," he whispered. "I have to call Phoenix." He dialed the number for Jensen. It was his only lifeline. The $50 million from Phoenix wouldn't cover the whole debt, but it would be enough to buy time. It would be enough to bribe the zoning commissioner. It would be enough to get the insurance back. "Pick up," Richard hissed, pacing his office. "Pick up, you useless lawyer," Jensen answered on the fourth ring. "Mr. Sterling," Jensen said calmly. "I assume you have seen the news." "Jensen." "Where is the money?" Richard screamed. "I checked the accounts. The wire hasn't hit. The bank is calling the loan. I need that $50 million released right now." "I am afraid there is a complication," Jensen said. "Complication," Richard roared. "We have a contract. I signed your damn guarantee. I polished the shoes of your assistant. Give me my money." The board has flagged the transaction, Jensen said, his voice smooth as silk. Due to the stop work order and the insurance cancellation, the risk profile of the project has changed. The chairman has put a hold on the funds. You tell the chairman that I will sue him, Richard shouted. I will burn Phoenix Holdings to the ground. You are not in a position to burn anything. Mr. Sterling Jensen replied, cold and sharp. You are in default. Technically, we could walk away right now and leave you to the sharks. Richard stopped pacing. He leaned against the glass wall. The city below looked dizzying. Please, Richard whispered. His voice broke. Please, Jensen, I need this. I will lose everything. There was a long silence on the line. I was listening from the cabin. I heard the desperation in his voice. It was the sound of a man who finally realized he was mortal. There is one way, Jensen said slowly. What is it? Richard asked. Anything. I will do anything. The chairman is willing to reconsider, Jensen said. But he wants to meet you. Fine, Richard said. I will come to your office. I will be there in 10 minutes. No, Jensen said. The chairman is not in the office. He is inspecting a potential acquisition property on the south side. He wants you to meet him there. He wants to look you in the eye and see if you are still worth the investment. The south side, Richard asked. Why would he be there? He likes to see where the real value is hidden, Jensen said. Do you want the meeting or not? Send me the address, Richard said, grabbing his coat. I watched on my laptop screen as Jensen sent the text message. I watched as the blue bubble appeared on Richard's phone. 1402 Oak Street. Richard stopped. He stared at the phone. He knew that address. It was burned into his memory. That is the slums, Richard muttered to himself. That is the shack. That is where I sent Damon. He paused. Why would the chairman of a billion-dollar equity firm be at the shack of a retired janitor? Then a thought crossed his mind. I could see it on his face through the security camera I had hacked in his office. Hope. Delusional, twisted hope. He thinks the chairman is buying the land, Richard said to the empty room. Of course, it is a gentrification play. He is going to bulldoze that whole miserable neighborhood and build condos. He is a visionary. Just like me. Richard grabbed his briefcase. He fixed his tie in the reflection of the window. I can sell this, he told himself. I can show him I understand the vision. I can show him we are partners. He ran out of the office. I sat at my kitchen table in the cabin, the table where Damon used to do his homework. The table where we ate canned soup for the last 2 weeks. He is coming, I said to Damon. Damon was standing by the window. He was wearing a fresh shirt. He looked nervous, but steady. Is he alone? Damon asked. He is alone, I said. No lawyers, no bodyguards, just him and his ego. Damon looked around the small living room. It was clean, but it was still a poor man's house. The peeling paint, the mismatched furniture, the smell of old wood. He is going to hate being here, Damon said. That is the point, I said. 30 minutes later, I heard the hum of a high-performance engine. It was a sound that didn't belong on our street. It was the deep purr of a 12-cylinder Bentley. I walked to the window. The silver car moved slowly down the potholed street. It looked like a spaceship that had landed on the wrong planet. Neighbors were stepping out onto their porches to watch. Children stopped playing ball. Richard Sterling was coming to the ghetto. The car pulled up in front of my house. The mud splashed onto the pristine chrome wheels. Richard sat in the car for a moment. I could see him looking at the house. He looked at the sagging roof. He looked at the overgrown weeds. He looked at the rusted truck in the driveway. He must be confused. He must be thinking there is a mistake. But then he checked his phone. This was the place. He opened the car door and stepped out. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. He stepped carefully, trying to avoid the puddles, but his expensive shoe sank into the soft mud. He grimaced. He walked up the path. He adjusted his tie. He put on his business face, the face he used to charm bankers and intimidate contractors. He walked up the creaking steps of the porch. He stood in front of the door. The paint on the door was chipped, revealing the gray wood underneath. He raised his hand and knocked. 3 sharp, authoritative raps. I looked at Damon. Go to the back room, I said. Damon nodded and disappeared into the shadows. I sat down in my armchair. I did not get up. I did not smooth my shirt. I sat there like a man who had nowhere else to be. Come in, I yelled out. My voice was not the voice of a chairman. It was the voice of Caleb. The door handle turned. Richard pushed the door open. He stepped inside, bringing the smell of expensive cologne into my stale house. He looked around, expecting to see a team of executives. He expected to see blueprints and architectural models. Instead, he saw me. I was sitting in the armchair, whittling a piece of wood with my pocket knife. I was wearing my flannel shirt and my work boots. Richard stopped. He blinked. He looked around the empty room. "You," he said. His voice was a mixture of confusion and disappointment. "What are you doing here?" Richard asked, looking at me with disgust. "Is the chairman here? Did he buy this dump from you already?" I didn't look up from my whittling. "Close the door, Richard," I said. "You are letting the heat out." Richard's face turned red. "I am not here to talk to you, janitor. I have a meeting. A meeting with a man who could buy and sell you 1,000 times over. Where is he? Is he in the back?" He took a step further into the room, looking toward the kitchen. "Jensen gave me this address," Richard snapped. "He said the chairman of Phoenix Holdings was here." I stopped whittling. I blew the wood shavings off the small figure I was carving. I looked up at him. "Jensen didn't lie," I said. Richard froze. He looked at me. He looked at the knife in my hand. He looked at the calm, steady expression on my face. "What did you say?" Richard whispered. I said Jensen didn't lie, I repeated slowly. Richard laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched laugh. You are the chairman. That is the funniest thing I have heard all day. What is this, Caleb? Some kind of joke? Did Damon put you up to this? Is he hiding in the closet? I stood up. I placed the knife and the wood carving on the table. I walked toward him. Richard took a step back. He bumped into the door. "You entered my house without wiping your feet, Richard," I said, pointing at his muddy shoes. Richard looked down at his shoes, the same shoes I had polished yesterday. "Answer me," he shouted, trying to regain control. "Where is the money? Where is the chairman?" I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a phone, not my old flip phone, the satellite phone. I held it up. The screen displayed the Phoenix Holdings logo. Richard stared at the phone. He recognized it. He had seen heads of state use phones like that. "No," he whispered. "No. That is impossible. You are a janitor. You scrubbed my floors. And while I scrubbed your floors, I read your trash," I said. "I read your memos. I read your discarded financial statements. I learned how you hide money. I learned how you cheat taxes. And while you were buying cars, I was buying stocks. While you were building towers of glass, I was building a fortress of iron." I took a step closer. "I am Phoenix Holdings, Richard. I am the bank. I am the insurance company. And as of this morning, I am the owner of your debt." Richard's knees gave way. He slumped against the doorframe. His face went gray. You own the debt," he stammered. "Every cent," I said. Then help me," he begged. The arrogance vanishing in an instant, replaced by pure terror. "Caleb, please. We go back 40 years. Help me. Stop the bank. Release the funds. I will give you anything. I will give you a seat on the board. I don't want a seat on the board." "Richard," I said, cold as ice. "Then what do you want?" I walked past him and opened the front door. I pointed at the muddy yard. "I want you to get off my property," I said. Richard looked at me. He looked at the shack. He realized that the small wooden house he had despised was actually the courtroom where his sentence had been passed. "But the loan," he cried. "The default. They will take my house tomorrow." "I know," I said. "I will be there to collect the keys." Richard turned and ran. He ran back to his Bentley. He slipped in the mud and fell onto his hands and knees, ruining his suit. He scrambled up, looking like a frightened animal. He dove into the car and sped away, mud flying everywhere. I watched him go. Damon stepped out of the back room. He stood beside me, watching the silver car disappear. "He knows now," Damon said. "He knows," I said. And now the real pain begins. The address Jensen gave Richard was not a penthouse. It was not a country club. It was in the heart of the industrial district, a place where the street lights had been broken for years, and the only things that grew were rust and resentment. I knew this place well. I bought the deed to this abandoned textile factory 10 years ago. It was a cavernous skeleton of a building smelling of old oil and forgotten labor. It was the perfect place for an execution. I arrived an hour early. I parked my truck around the back, hidden behind a stack of rotting shipping containers. I walked into the main warehouse floor. It was vast and empty, save for a single heavy wooden chair I had placed in the center of the concrete floor. A single industrial light bulb hung from the ceiling by a wire, casting a cone of yellow light onto the chair, leaving the rest of the room in deep shadow. I sat down. I turned the chair away from the entrance, facing the far wall of crumbling brick. I sat in the darkness, my face hidden, my body obscured by the high back of the chair. And I waited. I checked the small device in my hand, the voice recorder. It was fully charged. The red light blinked once, a silent eye ready to witness the truth. At 2 o'clock exactly, I heard the rumble of the Bentley. It sounded angry out here on the cracked pavement. It sounded like a beast that knew it was trapped but was still trying to roar. I heard the heavy metal door creak open. The wind rushed in, carrying the sound of Richard's footsteps. Click, clack, click, clack. Expensive shoes on gritty concrete. He stopped. I could feel his hesitation. I could feel his disgust radiating across the room like a wave of heat. He pulled out his phone. I heard him dialing. Jensen. He hissed into the phone, his voice echoing off the metal walls. Where the hell did you send me? I am in a warehouse. It smells like rat urine and failure. Is this a joke? If this is some kind of sick power play, I will have your license. He paused, listening to whatever lie Jensen was feeding him. He is here, Richard asked. In this dump. Why? He likes the authenticity. My God, rich people are insane. Fine. I am going in, but have the car ready. I want to leave this sewer the second I get the check. He hung up. He took a deep breath. He composed himself. I could hear him smoothing his suit, fixing his tie, putting on the mask of the charming billionaire. He walked toward the circle of light. Hello, he called out. His voice was bright, fake, overly confident. Is anyone there? I am looking for the chairman of Phoenix Holdings. I did not move. I did not speak. I just sat there, a silhouette in the gloom. Richard stepped closer. He saw the chair. He saw the figure sitting in it. Ah, there you are, he said, stopping at the edge of the light. Mr. Chairman, it is an honor to meet you. I must say you have quite the eye for atmosphere. Very industrial, very raw. I can see why you like it. It reminds us of where the work gets done, doesn't it? I remained silent. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to fill the silence with his own ego. Richard chuckled nervously. He took another step. I know you are a busy man, so I will get straight to the point. We have a small hiccup with the bank. A misunderstanding, really. Bureaucrats, you know how they are. They see a stop work order and they panic. But the Skyline project is sound. It is a gold mine. I just need you to override your board. Release the $50 million. Once the concrete starts pouring again, the city will back off. We just need to grease the wheels. I slowly raised my hand. I signaled for him to stop. He froze. You are a man of few words, Richard said. I respect that. Money talks right. That is my motto too. I cleared my throat. I pitched my voice low, guttural, changing the cadence so he wouldn't recognize the janitor he had yelled at just yesterday. Why did the project stop, Mr. Sterling? I asked. Richard straightened up. He thought he was talking to a peer. He thought he was talking to another shark. Sabotage, he said quickly. Pure and simple. I have enemies. Jealous competitors who can't stand to see a visionary succeed. They planted fake stories about safety violations. They bribed the zoning commissioner. It is a witch hunt. And your architect, I asked, my voice remaining in the shadows. I heard he was fired. Was he incompetent? Richard laughed. It was a loud, ugly sound that bounced off the steel beams. Incompetent. No. He was talented, I will give him that. But talent is cheap. You can buy talent on every street corner. No. The problem with Damon was not his skill. It was his background. His background, I repeated, prompting him. Richard walked around the edge of the light, pacing like he was giving a lecture. You and I, we are men of the world, Mr. Chairman. We understand that success isn't just about money. It is about breeding. It is about pedigree. You don't put a racehorse engine in a donkey cart and expect to win the Derby. I gripped the armrest of the chair. My knuckles turned white in the darkness. Go on, I said. Damon was a charity case. Richard continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He came from nothing. His father is a nobody, a janitor who lives in a shack. I tried to elevate him. I gave him my name. I let him marry my daughter. I thought I could wash the gutter off of him. But you know what they say. You can take the boy out of the slum, but you can't take the slum out of the boy. I pressed the record button on the device in my lap. He polluted my family, Richard said, spitting the words out. He made my daughter soft. He filled her head with romantic nonsense about love and equality. And then he gave me a grandson who, well, let's just say the boy has certain traits that don't fit the Sterling brand. Traits, I asked. Richard stopped pacing. He looked at the back of my chair, assuming I was nodding in agreement. Look, I am not a bigot, Richard said, waving his hand dismissively. I hire plenty of them. They make great security guards. They are excellent at heavy lifting. But I don't want them sitting at my dinner table. I don't want their blood mixed with mine. It weakens the stock. It dilutes the legacy. He laughed again. So I did what any good gardener does. I pruned the dead weight. I cut him loose. I kicked him and his brat out. I told him he wasn't worthy. And you know what? It felt good. It felt like cleaning out a clogged drain. Now my company is pure again. My family is secure. We are ready to soar. That is why this investment is so safe. I have removed the weak link. I looked down at the recorder. The little red light was pulsing, capturing every vile word, every ounce of hatred, every confession of his twisted soul. He called my son a clogged drain. He called my grandson a weak link. He called my bloodline a pollution. This was not just business anymore. This was a confession. And in the world of high finance where reputation is currency, this recording was a nuclear bomb. You seem very sure of yourself, Richard, I said. I am, Richard replied. I am a Sterling. We are born to rule. We don't apologize and we don't mix with the help. So what do you say? Do we have a deal? Will you release the funds so I can finish my tower and look down on this city like I deserve? I stopped the recording. I saved the file. I stood up. Richard took a step back, surprised by my sudden movement. He still couldn't see my face. We have a deal, Richard, I said, turning my body slightly still, keeping my face in the shadow. But not the one you think. Richard squinted, trying to see me. What do you mean? I mean that you are right about one thing, I said, stepping fully into the circle of yellow light. Richard's eyes widened. He blinked. He tilted his head. You can't take the slum out of the boy, I said, my voice returning to its natural tone, the voice of Caleb Bennett. Richard's jaw dropped. He staggered back as if he had been punched. You, he gasped. The janitor. Hello, Richard, I said, holding up the recorder. No. Richard stammered, shaking his head violently. No. This is a nightmare. I am hallucinating. You are shining shoes. You are poor. You cannot be the chairman. I walked toward him. He retreated until his back hit a rusty support beam. I am the chairman, I said, towering over him. I am Phoenix Holdings. I am the bank. I am the insurance. And now, thanks to you, I am the man who holds the tape that will destroy your reputation forever. Give me that. Richard shrieked, lunging for the recorder. I caught his wrist in midair. I twisted it effortlessly, forcing him to his knees on the dirty concrete. You said you don't want my blood mixed with yours, I whispered, leaning down into his face. You said we are only good for heavy lifting. Well, Richard, you are right. I am doing the heavy lifting now. I am carrying your fate in my hands. And it is very, very heavy. I released him. He fell into the dust, coughing and sputtering. You recorded me, he cried, looking up with wild eyes. You trapped me. I didn't trap you, Richard, I said, turning to walk away. I just handed you a shovel. You are the one who decided to dig. I walked toward the exit, leaving him kneeling in the circle of light alone in the vast, empty warehouse. You can't do this, Richard screamed after me, his voice cracking with panic. You can't release that tape. It will ruin me. I will be a pariah. I stopped at the door. I didn't turn around. You are already ruined, Richard, I said. The tape is just the eulogy. I pushed the heavy door open and walked out into the gray afternoon. The air smelled of rain and justice. I climbed into my truck. I placed the recorder on the dashboard. It was done. The trap was sprung. The beast was captured. Now it was time to let the world see what kind of monster had been hiding in the penthouse. And it was time for Damon to hear exactly what his father-in-law really thought of him. It would break his heart, but it would also set him free. The victory at the warehouse felt sweet, but victory often has a bitter aftertaste. We returned to the cabin that evening feeling like we had finally turned the tide. Damon was quieter, absorbing the reality of what I had told him about the trap I set. Sarah was cooking dinner, trying to make the meager ingredients I had in the pantry taste like a celebration. But the air was heavy. The stress of the last 2 weeks, the fear, the hunger, the constant threat of homelessness had taken a toll that we had not yet calculated. We were sitting at the table when it happened. Sarah dropped a fork. It clattered loudly onto the floor. I looked up. Her face was the color of ash. She swayed on her feet, her hand gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. "Damon," she whispered. And then she collapsed. She did not fall gracefully like they do in the movies. She fell like a stone, hitting the floor with a terrifying thud that shook the whole room. Damon screamed. He was at her side in a split second. I was right behind him. She was breathing, but it was shallow and ragged. Her skin was cold and clammy. We rushed her to St. Jude's Hospital in my truck. I drove like a madman, running red lights, my hand on the horn. Damon sat in the back, holding her head in his lap, crying, pleading with her to wake up. The next hour was a blur of white coats and beeping machines. I sat in the waiting room, holding Leo, who was terrified. I stared at the clock on the wall. Each second felt like an hour. Each minute felt like a lifetime. Finally, a doctor came out. He looked tired. "Mr. Bennett," he asked. Damon jumped up. "Is she okay? Is she alive?" "She is stable," the doctor said. "She is dehydrated and suffering from extreme exhaustion and stress, but the good news is the baby is fine." Damon froze. "The baby." "Yes," the doctor smiled faintly. "She is 8 weeks pregnant. But Mr. Bennett, I have to be clear. This is a high-risk pregnancy. Her body is shutting down from stress. She needs absolute rest. No shocks, no trauma, or she will lose the child." Damon sank into a chair, putting his head in his hands. He was laughing and crying at the same time. Another child. A new life growing in the middle of all this death and destruction. We were allowed to see her. She was awake, lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to an IV drip. She looked small and fragile against the stark white sheets. Damon kissed her forehead, holding her hand like it was made of glass. "I am sorry," Sarah whispered. "I tried to be strong." "You are the strongest person I know," Damon said softly. "We are going to be okay. We are going to protect this baby." I stood by the window watching the parking lot. I had a bad feeling. A feeling that the predator was close. Richard Sterling does not lose gracefully. I had humiliated him in the warehouse. I had taken his dignity. I had taken his hope. A wounded animal is dangerous, but a wounded narcissist is lethal. I saw the silver Bentley pull into the emergency drop-off zone. It was covered in mud from my driveway, a stain he hadn't had time to clean. "He is here," I said, turning to Damon. Damon stood up, his face hardening. "He is not coming in here. Not now. He is already inside," I said, watching Richard storm through the sliding glass doors. Moments later, the door to the hospital room burst open. Richard Sterling did not knock. He did not ask for permission. He walked in like he owned the building. He looked terrible. His suit was rumpled. His eyes were bloodshot. He smelled of sweat and desperation. He ignored me. He ignored Damon. He walked straight to the foot of the bed and stared at Sarah. "You are causing a scene," Sarah Richard barked. "Fainting in a shack, getting dragged to a public hospital. Do you have any idea how this looks for the family?" "Get out," Damon said, stepping between Richard and the bed. "Get out before I throw you out." Richard laughed, but it was a dry, humorless sound. "Throw me out," he sneered. "You are in no position to throw anyone out. You can't even pay the bill for this room." He pushed past Damon and looked at Sarah. "I spoke to the doctors," Richard said. "They told me you are pregnant." Sarah pulled the sheets up to her chin, protecting her belly. "Yes," she said. Another mistake. Richard shook his head. Another burden. "But it doesn't matter. We can fix it." "What do you mean, fix it?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "I made a deal," Richard said, his eyes wide and manic. "I just left a meeting with a new partner, a man named Mr. Henderson. He is very interested in the Sterling brand. He is willing to invest $75 million to save the company, enough to pay off Phoenix Holdings, enough to pay off the bank." "That is great," Dad Sarah said, confused. "So you are saved?" "Not yet," Richard said, leaning over the bed. "Mr. Henderson has a condition. He wants to merge our families. He has been admiring you from afar, Sarah. He is 55 years old, a widower, very respectable. He wants a wife." The room went deadly silent. I felt the bile rise in my throat. "You are selling me," Sarah whispered. like a piece of furniture. "I am securing your future," Richard shouted, slamming his hand on the bed rail, making Sarah jump. "Look at you. You are dying in that shack. You are starving. This man can give you the world. All you have to do is sign the divorce papers with this loser and marry Henderson. He doesn't even mind the pregnancy. He said he will send the baby away to boarding school when it is born." "You are insane," Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face. "Get away from me. I love Damon. I am having his child." "Love," Richard screamed, his face turning purple. "Love does not pay the mortgage, Sarah. Love does not stop the bank from taking my house tomorrow. I need this deal. I need you to do your duty. You owe me this. I gave you life. Now you give me mine back." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a crumpled document. "Sign it," he hissed, shoving the paper into her face. "Sign the divorce papers, now." "I won't," Sarah sobbed, pushing his hand away. Richard snapped. The stress, the humiliation at the warehouse, the impending bankruptcy, it all boiled over. "You ungrateful little bitch," he roared. He raised his hand and slapped her. It was a hard, vicious slap. It echoed through the sterile room. Sarah's head snapped back, hitting the pillow. Her lips split open. Time stopped. I saw the red mark forming on her pale cheek. I saw the shock in her eyes. But I didn't have time to move, because Damon moved first. He didn't scream. He didn't shout. He just launched himself across the room. He was not an architect in that moment. He was a missile. He hit Richard with the force of a freight train. His fist connected with the center of Richard's face. Crack! The sound of cartilage shattering was sickening and satisfying all at once. Richard's nose collapsed. Blood sprayed across the white sheets. Richard went down screaming, clutching his face. Damon didn't stop. He was on top of him, raining down punches. Years of suppression, years of insults, years of being called unworthy came pouring out of him in a torrent of violence. "You touched her!" Damon roared, pounding Richard's ribs. "You touched her!" "Damon, stop!" I yelled, grabbing my son by the shoulders and hauling him off. "You will kill him!" Damon struggled against me, his chest heaving, his knuckles raw and bloody. He hit her. Damon panted, his eyes wild. "He hit my wife." Richard lay on the floor, groaning, curling into a fetal position. Blood was pouring from his nose, ruining his expensive shirt. He looked up at us. His face was a mess. One eye was already swelling shut. But then he smiled. It was a bloody, broken smile. "Help," he screamed. "Help! Murder! He is trying to kill me!" 2 security guards burst into the room, followed by a police officer who was stationed in the ER. They saw Richard on the floor, bleeding. They saw Damon standing over him with bloody hands. "Get on the ground," the officer shouted, drawing his taser. No, Sarah screamed, trying to get out of bed. He was protecting me. He hit me first. But Richard was already playing the part. "He attacked me." Richard wailed, spitting blood. "I came to visit my sick daughter, and this maniac jumped me. Look at my face. He broke my nose. I want to press charges. I want him arrested for attempted murder." The officer didn't wait for explanations. He grabbed Damon and slammed him against the wall. Damon didn't fight. He looked at Sarah. "I love you," he said as the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Richard struggled to his feet, helped by a security guard. He grabbed a towel and held it to his bleeding nose. He looked at Damon being dragged out of the room. Then he looked at Sarah. "You see what you did?" Richard hissed, his voice nasally and thick with blood. "You chose him. And now he is going away." He leaned in close to her, ignoring the blood dripping onto the floor. "I know the district attorney, Sarah. I play golf with him. I will make sure Damon gets 10 years for this. Aggravated assault on a senior citizen. He will rot in a cell. He will never see that baby born." Sarah sobbed uncontrollably, clutching her stomach, unless Richard whispered, his eyes cold and dead. "Unless you sign the papers. You sign the divorce papers, you marry Henderson, and I will drop the charges. I will let him go." He stood up and adjusted his bloody jacket. "You have until morning to decide. A husband in prison or a father with a saved company. The choice is yours." He walked out of the room, leaving a trail of blood drops on the linoleum. I stood there in the silence. The monitor by Sarah's bed was beeping rapidly, signaling her distress. I walked over to her. I took her hand. "Caleb," she wept, "he is going to destroy us. He is going to put Damon in prison forever." I squeezed her hand. I looked at the door where my son had just been taken away in chains. Richard Sterling thought he had played his ace. He thought violence was his trump card. He thought that by putting Damon in a cage, he could force us to surrender. He was wrong. I wiped a tear from Sarah's cheek. "Rest, Sarah," I said, my voice low and calm. "Do not worry about Damon." "But the police," Sarah cried. "The charges." "Richard broke a law of nature tonight," I said. "He spilled blood in a sanctuary, he threatened a mother, and he thinks the police can protect him." I walked to the window and looked out at the night. The rain had started again. "He put Damon in a cell to keep him away from the fight," I whispered. "But he forgot about the other Bennett." I pulled out my phone. "Richard thinks he controls the law," I said. "But tomorrow morning he is going to find out that I own the courthouse." I dialed Jensen. "Get the bail money ready," I said. "And Jensen, call the district attorney. Tell him if he wants to keep his job, he needs to take a meeting with the chairman of Phoenix Holdings immediately. Richard wanted a war. He just got an apocalypse." The police station smelled of stale coffee and misery. It was a smell I knew well from my youth, back before I learned how to make the system work for me instead of against me. I walked through the double doors, shaking the rain from my coat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the linoleum floor. Richard Sterling was standing at the front desk. He was holding a bloody towel to his broken nose and gesturing wildly with his free hand. He was shouting at the desk sergeant, a young woman who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else in the world. "Do you know who I am?" Richard screamed, his voice muffled by the towel. "I am a pillar of this community. I demand that you deny bail. That animal broke my face. He is a danger to society. I want him transferred to the maximum security wing immediately." The sergeant sighed, rubbing her temples. "Mr. Sterling, please lower your voice. The suspect is being processed. The judge will set bail in the morning." "I don't want bail." Richard spat, spraying small droplets of blood on the counter. "I want justice. I want him to rot." He turned around and saw me standing there. His eyes narrowed. The swelling had already started turning his face into a purple and black mask. He looked like a raccoon that had lost a fight with a semi-truck. But his arrogance was untouched. "Well, look who it is." Richard sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "The janitor has arrived. Did you bring your mop, Caleb? Because there is going to be a lot of tears to clean up when you realize you can't save your son." I walked toward him. My boots clicked rhythmically on the floor. I did not look angry. I looked bored. "Go home, Richard," I said. "You are bleeding on the floor." Richard laughed, but it came out as a gurgle. "I am not going anywhere until I see that thug loaded onto a prison bus. And you. You should be careful, old man. Accomplices can be arrested too. Maybe I should tell the officers that you put him up to it. Maybe I should tell them you ordered the hit." "You are delusional," I said, stopping a few feet away from him. "And you are broke," Richard shot back. "Do you have any idea what bail is going to be?" $50,000, maybe more. What are you going to do? Pawn your truck, sell your kidney? You don't have that kind of money, Caleb. You are going to walk out of here alone, and your son is going to spend the next 10 years wondering why his daddy couldn't save him. Richard turned back to the sergeant, slamming his hand on the desk. "Officer, throw this man out. He is loitering. He is bothering a victim of violent crime." The sergeant looked at me. She looked at my old clothes. She looked at my gray hair. She opened her mouth to ask me to leave. But before she could speak, the door to the captain's office opened. Captain Miller stepped out. He was a large man with broad shoulders and a face carved from granite. He ran the precinct with an iron fist. He was not a man who tolerated nonsense. "What is all this noise?" Miller barked, looking at Richard. Captain Richard said, straightening his tie, trying to look dignified despite the blood. "I am Richard Sterling. I am the victim here. I was just telling your sergeant to remove this vagrant from the premises." Richard pointed a shaking finger at me. Captain Miller looked at where Richard was pointing. He saw me. The scowl vanished from the captain's face. His posture changed instantly. He didn't look at a vagrant. He looked at a mentor. He walked around the desk, ignoring Richard completely. He walked straight up to me and extended his hand. "Mr. Bennett Miller," said, his voice warm and respectful. "I didn't know you were coming down here tonight. I would have met you at the door." I shook his hand. It was a firm grip. "Hello, Marcus," I said, using his first name. "I see you finally got that promotion." Miller smiled. "Thanks to you, sir. I am just trying to live up to the recommendation letter you wrote for me." Richard stood there frozen. His mouth hung open. He looked from me to the captain and back again. The gears in his head were grinding loudly. "Wait a minute," Richard stammered. "Captain, do you know this man?" Captain Miller turned to Richard. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by cold steel. "Do I know him?" Miller asked. Mr. Bennett put me through the police academy. He paid for my tuition when my father died. He has funded the Widows and Orphans Fund for this precinct for the last 20 years. Of course I know him. Richard blinked. He shook his head as if trying to clear a fog. Tuition, Richard whispered. Funded. But he is a janitor. He shines shoes. He lives in a shack. Captain Miller looked at Richard like he was insane. A janitor, Miller repeated. Sir, Mr. Bennett owns half the commercial real estate in this district. The building you are standing in right now sits on land leased from the Bennett Trust. He isn't a janitor. He is the landlord. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Richard stared at me. He looked at my flannel shirt. He looked at my work boots. He was trying to reconcile the image of the servant he despised with the reality of the power standing in front of him. No, Richard muttered. No, that is impossible. It is a lie. He is tricking you. He is a con artist. Miller ignored him. He turned back to me. Mr. Bennett, I assume you are here for your son Damon? Yes, Marcus, I said. There was a misunderstanding at the hospital. I read the report, Miller said, lowering his voice. Your son was defending his pregnant wife, and frankly, considering the man he hit, I am surprised he stopped at one punch. Miller glanced at Richard with thinly veiled disgust. We were going to release him on his own recognizance anyway, Miller continued. But since you are here, we can expedite the process. I will have the paperwork waived. You can take him home right now. Thank you, Marcus, I said. I appreciate it. Richard exploded. You can't do that, he screamed, spraying blood again. This is corruption. This is bribery. I will call the mayor. I will have your badge. You can't just let him go because his daddy bought you a badge. Captain Miller took a step toward Richard. He towered over the smaller man. Mr. Sterling Miller said, his voice dangerously low. If you shout in my station one more time, I will have you arrested for disorderly conduct and public intoxication. And unlike Damon Bennett, you will not be going home tonight. Do I make myself clear? Richard shrank back. He clutched his towel. He looked at me with pure hatred, but beneath the hate there was fear. A deep gnawing fear that he had stepped into a world he didn't understand. Fine, Richard hissed. Let him go. It doesn't matter. I will sue him in civil court. I will take every penny of this imaginary fortune you claim to have. Miller nodded to the sergeant. Bring him out. A moment later, the heavy metal door buzzed. Damon walked out. He wasn't wearing handcuffs. He looked tired, and his knuckles were bruised, but his head was high. When he saw me, he let out a breath he had been holding for hours. Dad, Damon said, walking over and hugging me. It is okay, son, I said, patting his back. Let's go home. Sarah is waiting. We turned to leave. Richard was standing by the door, blocking our path. He looked like a gargoyle, beaten and bloody. This isn't over, Caleb, Richard whispered as we passed him. I don't know what game you are playing. I don't know whose money you stole or what lottery you won, but you are still trash. You can buy a captain, but you can't buy class. I stopped. I looked at him. Richard, I said softly, you still think this is about money. Isn't it? Richard sneered. No, I said. It is about vision. You see a janitor because that is all you are capable of seeing. You see a shack because you don't know how to look at a foundation. I leaned in closer. And Richard. What? Get that nose fixed. It is hard to look down on people when you can't even see over your own swelling. I walked past him, pushing the door open for my son. We walked out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. Damon looked at me as we walked to the truck. Dad, he asked. The captain. He treated you like a king. I unlocked the truck door. Invest in people, son, I said. Not just buildings, concrete cracks, but loyalty lasts forever. I looked back at the station. Through the glass doors, I could see Richard Sterling standing in the middle of the lobby alone, arguing with a vending machine. He still didn't get it. He thought I had won a lottery. He thought I had found a lucky ticket. He couldn't comprehend that the man who emptied his trash had been building an empire under his nose for decades. He thinks it is luck, I said, starting the engine. Let him think that, Damon said, rubbing his bruised hand. Exactly, I replied, pulling out of the lot. Because when luck runs out, you have nothing. But when you build something brick by brick, nobody can take it away. Tomorrow was the day. The bank would move. Phoenix Holdings would move. And Richard Sterling would find out that his bad luck had a name. And that name was Bennett. The morning of the shareholder meeting, the sky was a brilliant, mocking blue. It was the kind of day that looked like a new beginning, but for Richard Sterling it was the end of the world. He just didn't know it yet. He woke up that morning believing he had survived the storm. He believed that the meeting with the chairman in the warehouse was a success. He believed that despite the humiliation, despite the recording, despite the broken nose, he had secured the money. He thought he had bought my silence. I parked my truck 2 blocks away from the Sterling Tower. I didn't want Richard to see it. Not today. Today required a different kind of entrance. Damon and Sarah sat in the back seat. Damon looked nervous, pulling at the collar of his shirt. It was a cheap shirt bought from a discount rack, but he wore it with dignity. Sarah looked pale. The stress of the pregnancy and the assault was still etched on her face, but her eyes were clear. She was ready. She was ready to face the father who had sold her. We walked the 2 blocks to the tower. I walked slightly behind them, my head down, wearing a long, worn-out trench coat and my old cap. To the world, I was just the old man trailing behind the young couple. To the world, I was a shadow. The lobby of the Sterling Tower was buzzing with activity. Men in dark suits whispered in corners. Reporters were gathered outside, held back by velvet ropes, hoping for a quote about the collapsed stock price. The smell of fear was thicker than the smell of coffee. Everyone knew the company was bleeding. Everyone knew today was the day the carcass would be picked clean. We approached the security turnstiles. Richard was there. Of course he was there. He was standing near the elevators, flanked by 2 large security guards. He was wearing sunglasses to hide his bruised eyes and a bandage across his nose. He was trying to project strength, but he looked like a battered prize fighter who had stayed in the ring too long. When he saw us, his jaw tightened. He stepped forward, blocking our path. "You have got to be kidding me," Richard hissed. "Good morning, Richard," Damon said steadily. "We are here for the meeting." "The meeting?" Richard laughed, a harsh bark of a sound. "This is a shareholder meeting, Damon. It is for investors. It is for the people who own this city. It is not a soup kitchen. It is not a family reunion. And it certainly is not a place for traitors." He looked at Sarah. "Go home, Sarah. You look terrible. You are embarrassing me." "I am a shareholder, Dad," Sarah said, her voice trembling but firm. "Mom left me shares in her will. I have a right to be here." Richard sneered. "Your shares are negligible. You possess 0.01% of the voting rights. You are a gnat." And as for him, he pointed at Damon, and that old relic behind you, he pointed at me. "They have no business here." He turned to the guards. "Remove them. If they resist, call the police. And this time tell them I want trespass charges pressed immediately." The guards stepped forward. They were big men with stone faces. They reached for Damon's arm. Damon didn't flinch. He didn't back down. But he didn't have to fight. "Hold it." The voice was smooth, calm, and authoritative. We all turned. Jensen was walking across the lobby. He looked impeccable in a navy blue suit, holding a briefcase that probably cost more than Richard's car. He walked with the easy confidence of a man who held the winning lottery ticket. "Jensen," Richard said, relief washing over his face. "Thank God you are here. Tell these people to leave. They are crashing the meeting. They are trying to ruin the deal." Jensen stopped between the guards and Damon. He looked at Richard. He didn't smile. "Mr. Sterling," Jensen said coolly. "I am afraid you are mistaken." "Mistaken?" Richard asked, confused. "These people are not crashing the meeting," Jensen said. "They are the guests of honor." Richard blinked behind his sunglasses. "Guests of honor," he repeated. "What are you talking about? Damon is a fired architect. Sarah is a disobedient child. And Caleb is a janitor. Why would Phoenix Holdings invite them?" Jensen adjusted his cufflinks. "The chairman requested their presence," Jensen said. "He feels that since the restructuring will affect the family legacy, it is only right that the family be present to witness it." Richard stared at Jensen. He was trying to calculate the angle. He was trying to figure out if this was a trap or a test. "The chairman," Richard whispered. "Yes. Of course. He wants witnesses. He wants them to see my victory. He wants them to see me save the company so they understand how powerful I am." Richard smiled. It was a grotesque expression beneath the bandage. "I understand," Richard said, nodding. "The chairman is a wise man. He wants to teach them a lesson." "Very well. Let them come up. Let them sit in the back. Let them watch the master at work." He stepped aside, waving his hand mockingly toward the elevators. "After you," he said. "But try not to touch anything. The cleaning crew is on strike because I stopped paying them. I don't want you making a mess." We stepped into the elevator. Richard squeezed in with us, along with Jensen. The ride up to the 50th floor was silent. The only sound was the hum of the machinery and Richard's heavy breathing. He smelled of painkillers and breath mints. He kept glancing at his reflection in the mirrored walls, adjusting his tie, checking his bandage. He was rehearsing his victory speech. The doors opened. We walked down the plush hallway to the main boardroom. It was packed. 50 of the city's most powerful investors sat around the massive oval table. The air conditioner was humming, but the room felt hot. Sweat beads glistened on foreheads. Papers were shuffled nervously. When Richard walked in, the room went quiet. All eyes were on him. Some looked angry. Some looked pitying. Most just looked worried about their money. Richard walked to the head of the table. He stood behind the chairman's chair, the chair that had belonged to his father, the chair he believed was his birthright. He looked out at the room. He took off his sunglasses, revealing his black eyes. He wanted sympathy. He wanted to look like a warrior. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice booming. "I know you are worried. I know the stock is down. I know the rumors are flying. You have heard that the Skyline project is dead. You have heard that the bank has called our loans." He paused for dramatic effect. "But I am here to tell you that the rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated." A few people shifted in their seats. They didn't look convinced. Richard smiled, pointing at Jensen, who was standing by the door. "I have secured a partner," Richard announced. "A partner with vision. A partner with deep pockets. Phoenix Holdings has agreed to inject $75 million into Sterling Corp effective immediately." A gasp went through the room. 75 million. It was a lifeline. It was a miracle. "We are saved," Richard shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "The project continues. The debt is serviced. And I, Richard Sterling, remain your chairman." He looked at Damon and Sarah, who were standing in the back corner of the room. He pointed a finger at them. "And to those who doubted me, he sneered. To those who thought I was weak, to those who thought they could bring me down with petty lawsuits and family drama, watch closely. This is what winning looks like." He turned to Jensen. "Mr. Jensen, if you would please present the final agreement for ratification. The board is ready to vote." Jensen walked to the front of the room. He placed his briefcase on the table. He clicked the latches open. The sound was loud in the silent room. He pulled out a single document. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," Jensen said. "However, there is a slight correction to your statement." "Correction?" Richard asked, his smile faltering. "Phoenix Holdings is indeed injecting capital," Jensen said, addressing the room. "But we are not doing it as a partner. We are doing it as an owner." The room erupted in whispers. Owner Richard shouted, "What are you talking about? It is a loan, a collateralized loan." "It was a loan," Jensen said calmly. "Until 9 a.m. this morning. At 9 a.m., the loan from Liberty Bank went into default. Phoenix Holdings purchased that debt at 9:01 a.m. So what?" Richard said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "So I owe you the money instead of the bank. I will pay you. Once the funds release, I will pay you." Jensen shook his head. "The terms of the default are clear, Mr. Sterling. Upon default, the holder of the debt has the right to immediate foreclosure on all pledged assets." Jensen picked up the document and held it up. "You pledged the company," Jensen said. "You pledged the building. You pledged your personal estate. And you pledged your voting shares." Richard's face went white. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and hadn't hit the ground yet. I signed a guarantee," Richard stammered. "But that was a formality. You said it was a formality." "I said it was required," Jensen corrected. "And since you cannot pay the $75 million right now, Phoenix Holdings is exercising its right to take control." "Take control," Richard whispered. "Yes," Jensen said. "As of this moment, Richard Sterling is no longer the majority shareholder. He is no longer the CEO. And he is certainly no longer the chairman." The room was in chaos. People were shouting questions. Lawyers were checking their phones. Richard grabbed the edge of the table. He looked like he was going to vomit. "You can't do this," he screamed. "Who is the chairman? Who is doing this to me? I want to see him." "You said he was coming. Where is he?" Jensen looked at the back of the room. He looked past the screaming shareholders. He looked past the confused board members. He looked at the corner where Damon and Sarah were standing, and right behind them, where I was leaning against the wall in my trench coat. "The chairman is here," Jensen said. Richard followed Jensen's gaze. He looked at the door. He expected a billionaire in a suit to walk in. He expected a stranger. He didn't look at me. He looked right through me. Jensen cleared his throat. "Mr. Bennett," Jensen said, his voice cutting through the noise, "the floor is yours." Richard froze. He turned his head slowly. He looked at Damon. Richard gasped. "No, you are the chairman. That is impossible. You are broke." Damon shook his head slowly. He stepped aside. "Not me," Damon said. He pointed to the shadow behind him. "Him." I stepped forward. I reached up and took off my old cap. I unbuttoned the dirty trench coat and let it slide off my shoulders onto the floor. Underneath, I was not wearing a flannel shirt. I was not wearing a uniform. I was wearing a charcoal gray Tom Ford suit that cost $5,000. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine. My tie was silk. I stood straight. The slouch of the janitor was gone. The limp was gone. I walked toward the table. The room parted for me like the Red Sea. Richard stared at me. His eyes were bulging. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. "Caleb," he whispered. "Hello, Richard," I said, walking to the head of the table. I stopped right in front of him. I looked at the leather chair. His chair. I think I said, my voice deep and commanding, "You are sitting in my seat." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually happens right after a bomb goes off, but before the screaming starts. 50 of the most powerful people in the city were staring at me. They were staring at the man they thought was a janitor, the man they had ignored for decades, the man who had cleaned their trash cans and polished their floors. But they were not looking at a janitor now. I stood there in my charcoal gray Tom Ford suit, a suit that cost more than Richard Sterling's first car. It was tailored to perfection, hugging my shoulders and straightening my spine. The old trench coat lay on the floor, a discarded chrysalis. The cap was gone, revealing my eyes. And my eyes were not the eyes of a servant. They were the eyes of a king who had returned to claim his throne. Richard Sterling was still gripping the edge of the mahogany table. His knuckles were white. His face was a mask of sheer incomprehension. His brain was trying to process the data, but the data did not make sense. In his world, janitors did not wear Tom Ford. In his world, poor black men did not interrupt board meetings. In his world, he was the apex predator. But the food chain had just been rearranged. Jensen stepped forward. He placed a hand on the stack of documents he had laid on the table. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Jensen said, his voice calm and ringing with authority, "let me make the situation crystal clear. As of 9:01 this morning, Phoenix Holdings acquired 51% of the voting stock of Sterling Corp. Through the conversion of defaulted debt." Jensen paused, letting the numbers sink in. "We are the majority. We are the owners. And as legal counsel for Phoenix Holdings, it is my distinct honor to introduce you to the chairman and the new owner of this company, Mr. Caleb Bennett." A collective gasp went through the room. It sounded like all the oxygen being sucked out at once. Richard made a sound. It was a strangled, pathetic noise like a dying engine. "You," Richard stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You. The old man. The help." I began to walk toward him. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a man who owns the ground he walks on. My shoes clicked against the polished floorboards, a sound that echoed like a metronome counting down the seconds of Richard's career. I walked past the investors. I saw their faces change. I saw the shock turn into calculation. They were sharks. They didn't care about Richard. They didn't care about friendship. They smelled money. And right now, I smelled like $75 million. I reached the head of the table. I stood right next to Richard. I was taller than him. I was broader than him. And in that moment, I was infinitely more powerful than him. Richard looked up at me. His eyes were wide and wet with fear. He looked at my suit. He looked at my silk tie. He looked at the Patek Philippe watch on my wrist, the same watch he had admired in magazines but could never afford. "This is a trick," Richard whispered, his voice trembling. "This is a fraud. You stole this. You stole the money. Security. Someone call security. Arrest him." He looked around the room, begging for help, but nobody moved. The security guards at the door, the same ones who had tried to throw me out, were standing at attention, staring at me with awe. They knew power when they saw it. "There is no trick, Richard," I said. My voice was deep, resonating from my chest, filling the room without shouting. "I stole nothing." I continued. "I earned it. I earned it while you were sleeping. I earned it while you were partying. I earned it while you were mocking me. I placed my hands on the back of the leather chair. His chair. You said something interesting to me once, Richard. You said it to my son. You said it to the man you thought was the chairman in the warehouse. Richard flinched as if I had hit him. You said that the bloodline of the Bennett family was not worthy, I said, leaning in close so he could see the fire in my eyes. You said we were pollution. You said we didn't belong at the Sterling table. I looked around the room, making eye contact with the board members. Well, Richard, look around you. I bought the table. I turned back to him. And you are right about one thing. This table is not worthy. It is too small. It is too small for my family, and it is certainly too crowded with you sitting at the head of it. Richard's legs gave way. He slumped into the chair, clutching the armrests as if they were life preservers. You can't do this, he whimpered. I am the founder. My name is on the building. Your name is on the debt, I corrected him. My name is on the deed. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. I pulled out a thick blue folder. It contained the foreclosure notice, the asset seizure order, and the termination of employment. I tossed the folder onto the table. It landed with a heavy slap right in front of him. It slid across the polished wood and stopped against his chest. I didn't come here to save your company, Richard, I said, my voice cold and hard. I didn't come here to be your partner. I didn't come here to bail you out of your mistakes. Richard looked at the folder. He looked at me. Then why, he choked out. Why did you buy the debt? I bought it to fire you, I said. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Fire me, Richard gasped. You can't fire me. I am Richard Sterling. Not anymore, I said. I looked at Jensen. Read the motion, I said. Jensen opened his file. Motion to remove Richard Sterling as CEO and chairman effective immediately for gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty and moral turpitude, Jensen read. All in favor. I raised my hand. Jensen raised his hand. And then one by one the other board members began to raise their hands. They saw the writing on the wall. They saw the sinking ship and the new captain. They voted with their wallets. Richard watched as every single hand in the room went up. His allies, his friends, his golf buddies. They all betrayed him in seconds. Motion carried, Jensen said, snapping his book shut. I looked down at Richard. He was shaking. Tears were streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat and the bruise on his cheek. He looked small. He looked pathetic. Get out of my chair, I said. Richard didn't move. He couldn't move. He was paralyzed by the magnitude of his loss. I grabbed the back of the chair. I pulled it back, spinning it around. Richard tumbled out, falling onto his hands and knees on the carpet. The same position he had forced me into just days ago. He looked up at me from the floor. Caleb, please, he begged. This is my life. No, Richard, I said, towering over him. This was your life. Now it is my asset. I pointed to the door. You are trespassing, Mr. Sterling. Security, remove him. The two large guards stepped forward, the same guards who Richard had ordered to throw us out. They walked past Damon. They walked past Sarah. They walked straight to Richard. They grabbed him by the arms. Not gently. They hauled him to his feet. Get your hands off me! Richard screamed, struggling weakly. I am the boss. I am the boss. Not anymore, pal, one of the guards said, dragging him toward the exit. Richard looked back at me as he was being dragged away. His eyes were wild. You are a janitor, he screamed. You are nothing. I stood at the head of the table. I smoothed my lapel. I looked at the 50 faces staring at me. I am the janitor, I said to the room, my voice calm and steady. And I just took out the trash. The doors closed behind Richard, cutting off his screams. The room was silent again. I looked at the back of the room. Damon was standing there. He was holding Sarah's hand. He was staring at me with his mouth open. He had never seen me like this. He had never seen the titan that lived inside his father. He looked at the suit. He looked at the chair, and then he looked at my eyes. He smiled. It was a smile of pure pride. I winked at him. Then I turned to the board of directors. I placed my hands on the mahogany table. I looked at the men and women who had enabled Richard's arrogance for years. Now I said, let's get to work. We have a skyline to build, and we are going to build it right this time, with good concrete, with safe steel, and with honor. I sat down in the leather chair. It was warm, it was comfortable, it fit perfectly. The double doors had barely closed when they burst open again. Richard Sterling was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a man who fought dirty, and he was fighting for his life. He had managed to shake off the grip of the guards, his suit jacket torn at the shoulder, his tie askew. He stumbled back into the boardroom, his chest heaving, his face a map of panic and rage. He ran to the center of the room. He looked at the faces of the board members, the men and women he had vacationed with, the people whose children went to school with his daughter. He was looking for a lifeline. He was looking for loyalty. "You cannot do this," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You cannot let this janitor steal my company. I built this. I built this tower. I made you all rich. Are you really going to let him throw me out like a dog?" He turned to the head of security, a man named Miller, who was standing by the door. "Miller," Richard shouted, "arrest him! Arrest Caleb Bennett. He is trespassing. I am your boss. I sign your checks. Do your job." Miller looked at Richard. Then he looked at me, sitting in the leather chair at the head of the table. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Miller took a step forward, but he did not move toward me. He moved behind me. He crossed his huge arms over his chest and stood like a stone wall protecting the new chairman. The other guards followed suit, lining up behind my chair. Richard stared at them. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The power had shifted. The guns were no longer pointing where he wanted them to point. "You are all fired," Richard shrieked, saliva flying from his mouth. "I will fire every single one of you." I leaned forward. I placed my elbows on the mahogany table. "Sit down, Richard," I said. "I won't sit down," he yelled. "I demand a hearing. You cited moral turpitude. You cited negligence. Those are lies. You have no proof. You are just a vindictive old man with a grudge." "Proof?" I asked, calmly. "Yes, proof," Richard demanded, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You need evidence to remove a founder. You have nothing but your own bitterness." I looked at the audiovisual technician in the corner of the room, a young kid who looked terrified. "Connect my phone," I said, sliding the satellite phone across the table. The technician hurried over. He plugged the device into the boardroom's sound system. Richard watched, confusion warring with fear on his face. He didn't know what was on the phone. He had forgotten his own words. Arrogance has a way of erasing memory. I stood up. I walked to the edge of the table so I could look down at him. "You want proof, Richard," I said. "You want the board to know why you are unfit to lead. You want them to know the true character of the man they trusted with their money." I signaled the technician. "Play it." The speakers in the ceiling crackled. And then Richard's voice filled the room. It was loud, clear, and undeniable. "It was the recording from the warehouse. I don't want them sitting at my dinner table. I don't want their blood mixed with mine. It weakens the stock. It dilutes the legacy." The room went deadly silent. The shareholders looked at each other. Some gasped. Some looked down at their hands in shame. But the tape continued. So I did what any good gardener does. I pruned the dead weight. I cut him loose. I kicked him and his brat out. I told him he wasn't worthy. Richard's face went the color of milk. He reached out as if to grab the sound from the air. "Stop it," he whispered. "Turn it off." But I didn't turn it off. I let it play. I let every venomous word soak into the walls. I am not a bigot. I hire plenty of them. They make great security guards. They are excellent at heavy lifting. But I don't want them polluting my family. The recording ended with the sound of his laughter. That cruel, high-pitched laugh that everyone in the room recognized. I looked at the board members. "Is this the voice of Sterling Corp?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence. "Is this the face you want on your brochures? Is this the man you want representing your investments in a city that is 50% black?" A woman at the end of the table, a managing partner from a pension fund, stood up. She looked at Richard with pure disgust. "This is unacceptable," she said. "We cannot be associated with this. The public backlash would destroy us." "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence," another board member shouted. Seconded came a voice from the back. Richard looked around the room. He saw the walls closing in. He saw his legacy crumbling under the weight of his own hate. It was a private conversation, he pleaded, holding his hands up. "I was tricked. He entrapped me. It was a confession, Richard," I said. "And now it is public record." Jensen stepped forward. He opened his briefcase again. He pulled out a red file this time. "Mr. Sterling Jensen," said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The bylaws of this corporation are clear. Any executive who engages in conduct that brings disrepute to the company is subject to immediate termination with cause." Jensen looked at the board, all in favor of immediate termination and removal. Every hand went up, even the hands of the men Richard had played golf with for 20 years. They didn't look at him. They looked at the profits. And Richard was now a liability. "It is unanimous," Jensen said. "You are fired, Mr. Sterling." Richard collapsed into the nearest chair. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He stared at the table, unable to comprehend that 40 years of empire building had just vanished in 5 minutes. But we were not done. I signaled Jensen. "The financial matters," I said. Jensen nodded. He walked over to Richard and placed a document on the table in front of him. "Mr. Sterling, regarding the personal guarantee you signed with Phoenix Holdings." Richard looked up, his eyes glassy. "What about it?" he whispered. "Since you are now unemployed and the company's stock you pledged has plummeted due to the scandal," Jensen explained, "your collateral is insufficient to cover the $75 million debt." So Richard breathed. "So what happens?" "So we are exercising the acceleration clause," Jensen said. "We are calling the personal assets." Richard shook his head. "No, you can't. I need time. I can sell some art. I can sell the vacation home." "There is no time," Jensen said, cold as ice. "The seizure order was signed by a judge 10 minutes ago." Jensen started listing the items, ticking them off on his fingers. "The estate in the Hamptons, seized. The penthouse apartment, seized. The private jet, seized. The art collection including the Basquiat you are so fond of, seized." Richard made a choking sound, and Jensen continued looking at the muddy shoes Richard was wearing, the cars, the Ferrari, the Porsche, and the Bentley you drove here today. "The tow trucks are already in the garage. My car." Richard gasped. "You are taking my car. We are taking everything," Richard, I said, stepping closer. "You leave this building with the clothes on your back, and honestly, considering how you paid for that suit, I should probably take that too." Richard looked at me. The reality of his situation finally pierced his delusion. He was not just fired, he was destitute. He was homeless. He was exactly what he had tried to make Damon. He looked around the room, frantically searching for a friend, searching for a miracle. But there were no friends here, only sharks who had smelled blood and moved on. His eyes landed on the back of the room. Sarah. My daughter was standing next to Damon. She was holding her stomach, protecting the life inside her. She looked strong. She looked beautiful. Richard stumbled out of the chair. He ran to her. He fell to his knees in front of her. He grabbed the hem of her dress with his shaking hands. "Sarah." He cried, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot and the sweat. "Sarah, please, you have to help me." Sarah looked down at him. She didn't pull away, but she didn't reach out. "Dad," she said softly. "Talk to him," Sarah, Richard begged, pointing at me. "Talk to Caleb. He is your father-in-law. He will listen to you. Tell him to stop. Tell him to leave me the house. Just the house. I can't live on the street. I am Richard Sterling. I can't be poor." Sarah looked at the man kneeling before her. This was the man who had slapped her in the hospital. This was the man who had tried to force her to abort her child. This was the man who had called her husband trash. "You told me love doesn't pay the mortgage, Dad," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I was angry." Richard sobbed. "I didn't mean it. I did it for you. I wanted you to be safe. You wanted to sell me," Sarah corrected him. "You wanted to trade me for a check." "Please, Sarah," Richard wailed, burying his face in her skirt. "I am your father. Blood is thicker than water. You can't let them do this to me. I will change. I promise. I will be good to Damon. I will love the baby. Just save me." The room watched in silence. It was pathetic. The great tycoon reduced to a beggar. Sarah looked at Damon. Damon looked back at her. He didn't tell her what to do. He let her choose. Sarah looked back down at her father. She reached down and gently removed his hands from her dress. She took a step back, creating a distance that felt like miles. "You said the Bennett bloodline wasn't worthy," Sarah said. Richard looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "I was wrong," he cried. "I was wrong about everything. They are worthy. They are kings. Just tell him, Sarah." Sarah shook her head. "No, Dad. You were right." Richard blinked, confused. "What?" "We aren't worthy of your world," Sarah said, "because your world is built on hate, and we don't live there anymore." She turned to me. "Caleb," she said, "do what you have to do." Richard let out a scream of pure despair. He tried to grab her again, but Damon stepped in front of her. "Don't touch her," Damon said. Richard looked at Damon. He looked at the man he had fired, the man he had blacklisted. "Damon," Richard whispered, Help me. You are a good man. You are soft. Show mercy." Damon looked at Richard. He looked at the broken nose he had given him. "I am not soft, Richard," Damon said. "I am just patient, and my patience just ran out." Damon turned to the security guards. "Get him out of here." The guards moved in. They grabbed Richard under the arms. He went limp. He was too broken to fight. He was sobbing loudly, a sound that echoed off the expensive wood paneling. "My money," he wailed as they dragged him toward the door. "My life. My legacy." I stood at the head of the table watching him go. I picked up the folder of debt. "Legacy is not what you leave for yourself, Richard," I called out to him. "It is what you leave for your children, and you left them nothing but scars." The doors opened. The flash of cameras from the hallway exploded as the press saw Richard Sterling being dragged out by security. I heard the questions being shouted. "Mr. Sterling, is it true you are bankrupt? Mr. Sterling, why are you crying?" The doors closed. The room was quiet. I looked at the board members. "Meeting adjourned," I said. I walked over to Damon and Sarah. I put my arms around them. "It is done," I said. Sarah buried her face in my chest. She was crying, but they were tears of relief. "Is he gone?" she asked. "He is gone," I said, "and he is never coming back." Jensen walked over. He handed me a set of keys. "The keys to the penthouse," Mr. Chairman Jensen said. "And the keys to the Bentley. It is parked downstairs." I took the keys. I tossed them to Damon. "I think your old car is a little crowded for a growing family," I said. "Take the Bentley." Damon looked at the keys. He looked at me. "Dad," he said, "I can't drive that. It is his car." "It is. It is your car, son," I said. "We just need to get the mud off the tires." We walked out of the boardroom. We walked past the empty chair. We walked toward the elevator not as survivors, but as conquerors. Richard Sterling was gone. But the Bennett bloodline was just getting started. Richard Sterling was on his knees. The man who had once commanded the skyline of the city was now reduced to a weeping mess on the carpet. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his face was swollen, and his dignity was gone. The board members had fled the room like rats, abandoning a sinking ship, leaving only the security guards standing like statues by the door. And us, the Bennett family. Richard crawled towards Sarah. He looked like a man drowning, reaching for a piece of driftwood. "Sarah," he sobbed, reaching for her hand. "You cannot leave me like this. I am your father. I raised you. I gave you everything. The private schools, the horses, the vacations in Europe. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" Sarah looked down at him. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry. She had shed all her tears in the hospital room the night he slapped her. "You gave me things," Dad, Sarah said, her voice trembling with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "You gave me objects, but you never gave me a choice." She took a step back, moving closer to Damon. She took Damon's hand, her fingers interlaced with his, locking together like iron. "You told me I had to choose," Sarah continued, looking Richard in the eye. "You stood in that hospital room while I was pregnant and terrified, and you told me I had to choose between my bloodline and my love. You told me that if I didn't divorce Damon, you would let him rot in prison." "I was trying to save you," Richard cried. "I was trying to protect the family name. You were trying to sell me," Sarah said, her voice rising. "You wanted to trade me to Mr. Henderson for a check. You wanted to trade your grandson for a merger. That isn't family, Dad. That is a transaction." She placed her other hand on her stomach, protecting the unborn child. "So I am making my choice," Sarah said. "You told me to choose between the Sterling blood and the Bennett blood." She looked at Damon. She looked at me. She looked at the men who stood by her when she had nothing. "I choose the Bennetts," she whispered. "I choose the family that doesn't put a price tag on love. I choose the family that would burn down the world to save me, not sell me to save a building." "Sarah." "No," Richard wailed, reaching out again. "Goodbye, Dad," Sarah said, turning away. "I hope the money was worth it." "Oh, wait. You don't have the money anymore either." She tugged on Damon's hand. "Let's go home," she said. Damon looked at Richard one last time. There was no anger left in his eyes, only pity. "You should have let us be." "Richard," Damon said softly. "We would have been happy with nothing. But you forced us to take everything." They walked toward the door. The security guards stepped aside, bowing their heads respectfully as the new owner's son and daughter-in-law passed. The heavy doors closed with a soft click, leaving a silence so profound it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. It was just us now, Caleb Bennett and Richard Sterling, the predator and the prey. Except the roles had reversed so completely that Richard didn't even know how to breathe anymore. I walked slowly around the table. I ran my hand along the smooth mahogany. I stopped at the window looking out at the city view that Richard had cherished so much. "It is a nice view, Richard," I said without turning around. "I can see why you fought so hard to keep it." Richard struggled to his feet. He used the chair to pull himself up. He was shaking. He wiped his face with his sleeve, smearing blood and snot across his cheek. He stared at my back. He stared at the cut of my suit. He stared at the confident way I held myself. "Who are you?" Richard whispered. His voice was broken, a raspy sound of total defeat. I turned around. I leaned against the windowsill, crossing my arms. "I am Caleb," I said. "No." Richard shook his head, violent tremors running through his body. "No, you are not. Caleb is a janitor. Caleb drives a rusted truck. Caleb lives in a shack with peeling paint. You are a monster." He took a step toward me, his eyes wide with confusion and madness. Why, he screamed. "Why did you do it? If you have this kind of money, if you are Phoenix Holdings, if you own banks and insurance companies, why did you live like that? Why did you pretend to be poor? Why did you scrub my floors?" He fell back against the table, sobbing. "You could have bought this company 10 years ago. You could have lived in a mansion. You tricked me. You set me up. Why, Caleb? Why?" I pushed myself off the windowsill. I walked toward him. I moved into his personal space until I was towering over him. Richard looked up at me, terrified. I leaned in close. I lowered my voice to a whisper that was louder than any scream. "Because, Richard," I said, "I wanted to know who my son married." Richard blinked, confusion clouding his eyes. What he breathed. "A rich man never knows who loves him," I said. "If I had driven a Bentley to your house 10 years ago, you would have welcomed Damon with open arms. You would have loved him, not for who he is, but for what he could give you. You would have let Sarah marry him, not for love, but for the merger." I took a step closer, backing him against the table. "I needed to know if your daughter loved my son or my wallet. I needed to know if my son was strong enough to survive without my money. And I needed to know what kind of man you really were when you thought nobody powerful was watching." I pointed at his chest. "You showed me, Richard. You showed me exactly who you are. You are a man who kicks people when they are down. You are a man who measures worth by the ounce of gold, not the ounce of character." "But the money," Richard stammered. "The janitor job." "Why?" I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. "You call it dirty work," I said. "I call it reconnaissance. You ignored the janitor, Richard. You talked in front of me. You left documents on your desk. You threw financial statements in the trash." I leaned right into his ear. "You say my blood is dirty," I whispered. "You say I am not worthy to sit at your table. Well, Richard, you are right. I am a janitor." I paused, letting the words sink in. "And for 40 years I have been sweeping up your trash. I took every dollar you threw away. I took every opportunity you were too lazy to see. I took the scraps from your table and I built a kingdom." I grabbed him by the lapels of his ruined suit. I pulled him close. "You called my bloodline unwashed," I hissed. "Well, this unwashed blood just bought your entire life. I bought your house. I bought your car. I bought the chair you sit in. And I bought the right to throw you out of it." I shoved him back. He stumbled and fell hard onto the floor. He looked up at me. He saw the truth. He saw that his entire life had been a lie, and that the man he had despised was the architect of his destruction. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out, just a dry rattle of despair. I looked at the door. "Security," I called out. The doors opened instantly. Miller and his men marched in. "Mr. Bennett," Miller said. "This man is trespassing," I said, pointing at the heap on the floor. "He has no business with Sterling Corp. Remove him." Richard scrambled backward on the floor crab, walking away from the guards. "No," he screamed. "No, you can't. I am Richard Sterling. This is my building." Miller grabbed him by one arm. Another guard grabbed him by the other. They hauled him up. His feet dangled off the ground. "Let me go!" Richard shrieked, kicking his legs. "Caleb, please! Have mercy! Where will I go?" "I have nowhere." I walked back to the head of the table. I sat down in the leather chair. I picked up a file and opened it, not looking at him. "The park is nice this time of year, Richard," I said. "I hear the benches are very comfortable." Richard screamed as they dragged him toward the door. "You are a devil," he howled. "You are the devil." I didn't look up. "And you, Richard," I said softly. "You are unemployed." They dragged him out. I could hear his screams echoing down the hallway. I could hear him begging. I could hear him calling for his lawyer, calling for his mother, calling for anyone who would listen, but nobody was listening. They dragged him to the elevator. They took him down 50 floors. They dragged him through the marble lobby where he had once walked like a god. The employees watched. The receptionists watched. The press outside pressed their faces against the glass. They dragged him out the front doors. It was raining again, a cold gray drizzle. Miller threw him onto the wet pavement. He landed hard, splashing in a puddle. His suit was soaked. His face was bleeding. He looked up. He saw the towering glass structure of the skyline. He saw his name on the building, but he knew it would be gone by morning. A photographer flashed a picture, then another, then 100. Richard Sterling curled into a ball on the sidewalk and wept. He had no suitcases. He had no family. He had no dignity. Up in the penthouse, I stood by the window looking down. He was just a small speck on the sidewalk, a piece of debris that had been swept away. I turned away from the window. The room was quiet. The air was clean. I took out my old flip phone. I dialed a number. "Hello," came a voice on the other end. "It is done," I said. "Is he gone?" the voice asked. It was the zoning commissioner. "He is gone," I said. "Lift the stop work order. We start building again tomorrow." "Yes, Mr. Chairman." I hung up. I looked at the empty boardroom. It was big. It was grand. But Sarah was right. It was too small. I stood up. I had a dinner to get to. My family was waiting. And for the first time in 40 years, I didn't have to change out of my work clothes to sit at the head of the table. Because the suit was my work clothes now, and the work was finally finished. 3 months have passed since the storm broke over the Sterling Empire. The seasons have changed in Chicago. The biting cold rain of that terrible afternoon has given way to the golden warmth of early autumn. The leaves in Lincoln Park are turning amber and crimson, painting the city in colors of fire and change. I drove my old Ford truck down the familiar streets toward the city center. I could have taken the Bentley. I could have hired a driver. But I prefer the truck. It reminds me of who I am. It reminds me that the man in the Tom Ford suit is still the same man who scrubs his own fingernails at night. I pulled up to the building formerly known as the Sterling Tower. The signage has changed. The massive gold letters that once spelled out Richard's ego have been taken down. In their place is a new sign. Modest, clean, modern, Bennett Sterling Group. I walked into the lobby. The security guards nodded to me, not out of fear, but out of respect. I stopped to ask about their families. I asked Miller if his son made the varsity football team. He beamed and told me he did. Richard never knew Miller had a son. Richard never knew Miller had a name. I took the elevator up to the 50th floor. The atmosphere was different. The silence of fear was gone, replaced by the hum of productivity. People were working. They were talking. They were building. I walked into the corner office. The door was open. Richard always kept it closed. Damon was sitting at the desk. He looked different. The shadows under his eyes were gone, replaced by a clarity of purpose. He was on the phone reviewing blueprints for the restarted Skyline project. He was talking to a foreman, not barking orders, but asking questions. "We need to make sure the foundation is reinforced," he said. "I don't care if it costs more. I want this building to stand for 100 years. He looked up and saw me. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who has found his place in the world. "Hi, Dad," he said, hanging up the phone. "Hello, Mr. CEO," I replied, walking over to the window. The view was the same, but it felt different. It didn't feel like a kingdom anymore. It felt like a responsibility. Sarah walked in a moment later. She was showing now the baby bump visible beneath her dress. She was glowing. She was holding a stack of files. "We just approved the grant for the Inner City Housing Initiative," she said, dropping the files on the desk. "And the scholarship fund for architecture students from low-income neighborhoods is up and running. We named it the Caleb Bennett Scholarship." I felt a lump in my throat. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "Yes, we did," Sarah said, kissing my cheek. "We are turning this company inside out, Caleb. We are taking the money that Richard used to hoard and we are pumping it back into the veins of this city. We are washing the bloodline clean." I looked at them. My son, the architect of the future. My daughter-in-law, the architect of hope. They were doing things I never could. I was the warrior who conquered the castle. They were the rulers who would bring the peace. I have a meeting with the zoning board, Damon said, checking his watch. But are we still on for dinner Sunday? I wouldn't miss it, I said. I think Leo wants me to fix his toy truck. I left them to their work. My work there was done. The chair was filled by a better man than Richard and a younger man than me. I drove out of the city back toward the neighborhoods where the fences are chain link and the houses are small. I pulled up to the park, the same park where I had found them 3 months ago. I parked the truck and walked over to the bench. It was dry today. The sun was filtering through the trees, dappling the ground with light. Leo was there. He was running through a pile of leaves, laughing that pure, unadulterated laugh that only a 5-year-old possesses. He wasn't shivering. He wasn't scared. He was wearing a new jacket, and his shoes were sturdy. I sat down on the bench. The wood was warm against my back. I stretched out my legs. I took a deep breath of the crisp air. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 40 years, I didn't feel the weight of the secret. I didn't feel the need to hide. I didn't feel the pressure of the next move. The chess game was over. The king had fallen, and the pawns had been liberated. "Hey, Caleb." I opened my eyes. It was Mr. Johnson, an old neighbor from down the street. He was walking his dog. He stopped looking at me with a curious expression. "I heard the rumors," he said, leaning on his cane. "People are saying your boy is running the big tower downtown now. People are saying you bought out the old owner. Is it true?" I nodded slowly. "It is true." Mr. Johnson whistled low and long. "Well, I will be damned. Did you win the lottery, Caleb? Is that how you did it? Did you hit the jackpot numbers?" I laughed. It was a deep rumble from my chest. I adjusted the brim of my old cap. "No lottery, Mr. Johnson," I said. "Just work." "Work?" Johnson asked. 40 years of work," I said. "I worked when I was tired. I worked when I was sick. I worked when people looked right through me. And I saved. And I waited. Waited for what Johnson asked. I looked at Leo chasing a squirrel near the swing set. "I waited for the right moment to invest," I said. Mr. Johnson nodded, though I don't think he fully understood. He tipped his hat and walked on. I watched him go. People always think it is a lottery. They think wealth is a lightning strike. They don't see the years of laying the copper wire to catch the electricity. They don't see the discipline. They don't see the sacrifice. I watched Leo trip and fall. He scraped his knee. For a second I tensed up, ready to run to him, but Leo didn't cry. He looked at his knee. He dusted off his hands, and he stood back up. He ran back into the fray. He had the Bennett resilience. I smiled. The bloodline was safe. It wasn't worthy because of a bank account. It wasn't worthy because of a building. It was worthy because it knew how to fall and how to rise. I leaned back on the bench. I was just an old man in a park. To the passerby, I was nobody. But inside, I was the richest man in the world. I had my son back. I had my dignity back. And I had taught a tyrant that you never judge a man by the calluses on his hands, but by the fire in his soul. I watched the sun begin to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was a beautiful ending to the day. And as I sat there surrounded by the peace I had fought so hard to win, I realized something. True nobility isn't found in your lineage, your bank account, or the color of your skin. It is forged in the fires of adversity and revealed in how you treat those who can do nothing for you. Richard Sterling thought his bloodline made him a king, but his arrogance made him a pauper. I spent a lifetime scrubbing floors to build a legacy not of gold but of dignity. In the end, the only bloodline that matters is the one that flows with integrity, resilience, and unconditional love. Everything else is just dust in the wind.